Chapter 577, Can It Be Fixed? Zhongxian pushed open the doors to enter the illusory city. Its interior was pitch black, such that he couldn't even see his outstretched hand. Taking 2 steps along the corridor, a sinister wind blew past, bringing an eerie voice to his ear. Woo woo woo. The voice was drenched with resentment and adoration, sorrow and happiness. It struck right into one's soul, rendering the action of covering one's ears meaningless. Is this soul beguilement? Zhongxian frowned. Mo Hunsheng had once used a similar technique against him back in the Soul Oracle tomb. Such techniques allowed the voice to resound within one's soul. It would be useless even if one were to inhibit all 6 senses. Lifting his gaze, Zhongxian saw countless savage eyes staring at him, threatening to leap out at him at any moment to tear him into shreds. To face hair-standing sorrowful cries and the threat of impending attacks under such a dark environment. This was indeed a test on one's temperament. If one's mental fortitude wasn't strong enough, one might just faint on the spot. Boom! Just as Zhongxian was scanning the surroundings curiously, he suddenly felt a powerful surge of energy gushing out from a corner of the room. It flowed along with the whistling of the wind, heading straight for him. His eyes immediately narrowed, and he leaped forward. But right after he dodged the attack, he felt another powerful surge of energy heading right for him. Dodging it with a leap, before Zhongxian could land on the floor, he felt yet another attack coming from a different direction. After dodging 7 to 8 of such attacks, a droplet of cold sweat dripped from Zhongxian's chin. He was starting to panic. The attacks were becoming more and more frequent. If this went on, it would reach a point where Zhongxian would be unable to cope at all, and this might potentially end in severe injuries for him. Could this test really be that difficult? No, something's wrong. I could feel the energy and disturbance in the air from the previous attacks, but I didn't hear any sound of collision between the wall and the surge of energy. After avoiding a few more attacks, a thought suddenly struck Zhongxian, leaving him stunned for a moment. He could hear the sharp whistling of the wind due to the barrage of attacks raining down on him, but somehow, the sound of collision when the force struck the wall or ground was absent. Even if Zhongxian dodged the attack, the force should have struck the wall or the ground, leaving behind a deep imprint or at least a mark of some kind. But there wasn't anything like that at all. Could the attacks be an illusion too? Eye of Insight. Thinking such, Zhongxian activated the Eye of Insight. In an instant, the darkness veiling his vision lightened, allowing him to see the rough outline of the entire room. The Eye of Insight allows one to peer into the essence of everything. While it was impossible for Zhongxian's Eye of Insight to peer through the entire Ghost Domain illusory city given the powerful might of the artifact, it wasn't too much of a problem for him to just see through the facades contained within the interior of a single room. And in an instant, he saw that the origin of the piercing wind sound that he heard previously was actually countless spirit beings lingering in the surroundings. It was impossible to tell whether these spirit beings were originally human, spirit beasts, or simply artificial beings. While they were able to stir up an intense wind through their motion, it was completely harmless to one's physical body. That was also the reason why the wall and floor remained undamaged. But still, if Zhongxian didn't have the Eye of Insight, he would have never dared to face that powerful, frenzied surge of energy even if someone were to inflate his guts. Other competitors might have been helpless before these spirit beings, and it would just be a matter of time before they crumbled before the immense pressure on them. But this won't work on me. Upon understanding the origin behind the attacks, Zhongxian's lips curled up into a smile. Unable to see or perceive these spirit beings, the other competitors would indeed be unable to deal with these spirit beings. It would just be a matter of time before the mounting pressure crushed their mental fortitude, snapping their thread of sanity. But as a soul oracle, if he were to allow mere spirit beings to get the better of him, it would indeed be embarrassing. Draw soul. Zhongxian's glabella glowed, and a soul-bearing semblance to his physical appearance emerged from his body. Wang. Zhongxian clasped his hands together, and a glow of light flashed across the room. The spirit beings, as though having met their nemesis, quickly fled in fear. The soul of soul oracles possessed extraordinary soul energy, and not to mention, the cultivation technique which Zhongxian practiced was the Heaven's Path soul art, granting his soul a mighty aura that ghosts dared not stand up against. It was already a huge benevolence, as well as a gesture of respect to Hongshe, that he didn't consume these spirit beings to nourish his soul. After chasing away those troublemaking spirit beings, the room fell silent. Returning back to his body, Zhongxian stood up to start looking for the exit when a thought suddenly struck him, and a smile slowly surfaced on his face. Why do I even need to search around? As long as I determine the flaws behind this artifact, wouldn't I be able to find the exit easily? Given that Zhongxian was attacked by so many soul beings right after he entered the ghost domain illusory city, who knew what else he might face later on? It would be too much trouble to go through everything. Since he had the Library of Heaven's Path, he could simply find the flaws behind the ghost domain illusory city and, just like with formations, pause its functioning. In any case, pausing a formation wouldn't damage it. Its functions could be easily restored after he left, and it wouldn't affect the challengers after him. With such a thought in mind, Zhongxian placed his hand on the floor, and a book materialized in the Library of Heaven's Path. Ghost Domain Illusory City, forged by 5-star master teacher Fei Yuzi. It harnesses the concepts of mystic gates hidden Jiao and contains innumerable spirit beings. It can be used as a test to train one's temperament. Flaws. Number 1. The stone pedestal at the center serving as the control center is easily noticeable. A detailed explanation on the Ghost Domain Illusory City could be seen on the book. The stone pedestal at the center is the control center. With the Eye of Insight active, Zhongxian proceeded forward and saw a stone pedestal with a height similar to his. Isn't this way too conspicuous? Seeing that something this important was actually placed so openly in the artifact, Zhongxian shook his head. But soon, he came to a realization. Often, the most dangerous of location tended to be the safest, and sometimes, placing it at the most conspicuous spot may make one overlook it due to their subconscious mind instinctively acknowledging the impossibility of it. Besides, the cultivators that enter the illusory city would have their hands full with dealing with the spirit beings. Even if they were to see the stone pedestal, they wouldn't have the spare energy to think of such things. Since this is the control center, will the ghost domain illusory city come to a halt if I were to knock this pedestal aside? Too lazy to read on, Zhongxian closed the book, and with his Eye of Insight still active, he began assessing the stone pedestal. He couldn't tell what the stone pedestal was made of, but it was exceptionally hard. Looking around it, Zhongxian wasn't able to find any mechanism around it. He tried pushing the pedestal with his hands, but as though connected with the fortress, it didn't budge in the least. I don't believe that I can't move it. Heaven's Path Fist Art. Frowning, Zhongxian gathered all of his strength in his fists, and as though a released arrow, his fists shot toward the stone pedestal. Pang! His fist struck the stone pedestal, but there was nothing except for a slight tremor. On the contrary, he felt a stinging pain on his fist. What a hard stone! Zhongxian was astonished. His strength totaled up to 2,600,000 ding, and complemented with the Heaven's Path Fist Art, even a primary-tier spirit weapon would be crushed instantly. And yet, not only did this ordinary-looking stone pedestal not budge in the least, his fist even grew red from the impact. The stone pedestal must be at least a spirit intermediate-tier artifact, or perhaps, even higher than that. To be able to withstand his attack, this stone pedestal had to be an incredible artifact similar to the illusory city. What should I do now? Zhongxian rubbed his glabella. He had finally found a way to stop the ghost domain illusory city, but due to his lacking cultivation, he wasn't able to do it. This felt extremely stifling to him. Wait. I might not be able to move it, but I can always draw on the help of others. After a moment of contemplation, Zhongxian's eyes suddenly lit up. He was incapable of moving it with his current strength, but he could always draw on the strength of others, such as his clone. Back then, when he exchanged blows with that fellow, he was crushed completely. The physical body of his clone was truly powerful beyond words. Come out. Willing so, Zhongxian's clone appeared before him. He had placed this fellow into his storage ring before heading over here, so summoning him hinged only on a single thought. Given the shared consciousness between the duo, the clone instantaneously understood the plight Zhongxian was in. Thus, Zhongxian ordered directly, break this stone pedestal to stop the formation. All right. The clone tightened his fists and released a punch. Heaven's Path Fist Art. Catcher. Catcher. With a crisp sound, a crack appeared in the stone pedestal before him. The crack swiftly crept across the entire pedestal, and voila, it crumbled into rubble. Can't you hold back a little? Zhong Xian's eyes widened in rage. Wasn't this stone pedestal so tough such that even his fist suffered great pain from the backlash of his attack? Why did it suddenly break just like that? Didn't it seem like his clone had used too much strength? Could it be that clone's physical body is simply too powerful, such that it induced a suppression effect on the stone pedestal? After a moment of bewilderment, Zhong Xian suddenly came to a realization, and he felt tears threatening to spill from his face. Due to the Nine Hearts Lotus being a god artifact, even if his clone didn't use too much strength, he could still destroy the stone pedestal easily. To make an analogy, it was just like putting a diamond against a dagger. While the dagger might be more efficient in a battle, in terms of ability to scratch glass, the diamond would be much more effective. He was just like the dagger, whereas his clone was the diamond. While the latter didn't use too much strength behind his attack, the stone pedestal still crumbled easily. Zhong Xian only intended to move the stone pedestal, but in the end, he ended up destroying it instead. Hong Long. Conflicted, Zhong Xian was just considering what he should do next when the entire Ghost Domain illusory city rumbled and started shaking violently. With its core destroyed, the formation supporting the illusory city was completely crippled. Thus, the gigantic infrastructure immediately started crumbling. Returning his clone to his storage ring, he glanced upward, only to see huge lumps of rock raining down on him. Knowing that it was too late for him to escape, he could only raise his arms to protect his head from the falling rocks. Given how formidable Yang Shi is, his student should have no trouble clearing the Ghost Domain illusory city. Outside, on the round stage, Hong Shi had been pacing back and forth worriedly ever since Zhong Xian walked in. Yang Shi had sent his student here to temper him, not to have him eliminated in the first round. But thinking deeper into the matter, given how powerful Yang Shi was, how could his student be anything simple? The Ghost Domain illusory city might be powerful, but I've already adjusted the difficulty such that at least 85% of the 56 challengers would be able to clear it. Zhong Shi shouldn't be eliminated here. Now, the only problem is how long it will take for him to clear the challenge. There was another benefit to the Ghost Domain illusory city: it could determine how powerful one's mental fortitude was. The faster one could escape from it, the stronger one's mental fortitude was. Since there was no need to worry about Zhong Shi's elimination, the main problem at hand would be how long he would take to clear the test. I would require 7 minutes to clear the illusory city. No matter how strong the mental fortitude of the participants is, they will need at least 10 minutes to clear the challenge. Considering Zhong Shi's age, it would be an incredible feat if he could clear the challenge in around 13 minutes. Hong Shi calculated internally. Seeing that there was still time, Hong Shi was just about to find a place to sit down and wait when the ground beneath him suddenly shook violently. He anxiously lifted his head to take a look, only to see the humongous Ghost Domain illusory city rumbling loudly before collapsing inward. After which, a figure with both arms raised above his head, a silhouette reminiscent of a valiant warrior, appeared amidst the cloud of dust. On the warrior's face was a sheepish smile. The warrior scratched his head apologetically and said, "Hong Shi, it seems like I accidentally broke your Ghost Domain illusory city. Can it be fixed?" Chapter 578, The Fearsome Otherworldly Demonic Tribe Fixed. Looking at the remaining rubble of the majestic castle from before, Hong Shi's body stiffened, and he nearly fainted on the spot. If you only broke a face of a wall or a corridor, I might still be able to fix it. But this? How in the world do you expect me to fix this? Fix your head. It's just a test. If you can clear it, so be it. If you can't, it's nothing much as well. May I ask how in the world did my Ghost Domain illusory city offend you for you to hold such a heavy grudge against it? Besides, how long has it been? 2 minutes? 3 minutes? In such a short period of time, even I would be unable to reach the center. How in the world did you manage to tear it down? Hong Shi's heart nearly stopped then, and he was about to go insane. Indeed. Contrary to Hong Shi's frenzied response, Pavilion Master Kang and the other elders from the Myriad Kingdom Alliance Master Teacher Pavilion slapped their faces, as if they'd known that this would occur. They knew that something would go awry, but even so, they underestimated the extent to which things could go awry at. This was the Master-Teacher tournament. Under such circumstances, how was the test supposed to proceed? The Ghost Domain Illusory City was the key to testing the candidate's temperament. Given that it had collapsed, how are the other participants going to be assessed? To cut off other people's path while walking your own. Zhongshe, aren't you being a little too competitive? While they were all speechless, Liao Wuji's body also swayed weakly from side to side in shock. It was just a moment ago that Ruo Huangongzi said that he was worried about the safety of the Ghost Domain Illusory City, and he mocked the other party for being ignorant. But from the looks of it now, it seemed like he was the one being ignorant. To tear down an entire fortress 3 minutes after walking in. You aren't a master teacher but a demolisher, right? While silence loomed in the surroundings, Zhongxian patted the dust off his body and stepped away from the rubble with a helpless expression. All he wanted to do was to silently halt the formation and walk out normally. Why was such a simple wish so hard to realize? Fix. It's impossible to fix it. Even though Hongshe's heart was hurting so much that it was dripping blood, and he was about to faint from anger. But he quickly forced himself to calm down and recover. No matter what, the other party was Yangshi's student. Furthermore, it wasn't an intentional action on the other party's part, so it was best for him to just overlook this matter. While he still felt it was a huge loss to lose a treasure of the Ghost Domain Illusory City's caliber, given that it was already destroyed, there was no use pondering over it. Thus, he could only swallow his pain and accept his loss. Just that. Given that the illusory city was completely wrecked, how were the others supposed to take the test? The other master teachers also shot glances over. After a moment of hesitation, Hongshe gritted his teeth and said, "Since the Ghost Domain Illusory City has been damaged, we'll put aside the temperament test for the time being and move on to the courage test." Even though having a single test voided in the preliminary round would affect the results, it was still at a level where he could overlook. Courage test. How is it going to be carried out? Upon hearing the next test, everyone swiftly recovered from their shock, and discussions sounded amidst the crowd. I believe everyone should know the reason behind why Hongshe established the Master Teacher Pavilion, Hongshe said. A Master Teacher replied, to strengthen the human race so as to better fend off the otherworldly demonic tribe and other calamities. The primary reason as to why Hongshe established the Master Teacher Pavilion was to raise the might of the human race as a whole so as to further its prosperity. Indeed, several 10,000 years ago, the powerful otherworldly demonic tribe committed innumerable atrocities, resulting in grievous sufferings to all life forms. In order to save the world, Hongshe established the system of master teachers, and after several 10,000 years of development, we've achieved an unprecedented level of prosperity. Hongshe nodded his head as his gaze fell on the crowd. The courage test is actually very simple. You just have to fulfill the responsibility of a master teacher and face an otherworldly demon. Otherworldly demon? Hasn't that race gone extinct already? Could it be that there are still survivors? Everyone was taken aback. The otherworldly demonic tribe had been expelled by Hongshe several 10,000 years ago, and not a single trace of them remained on the continent. To face an otherworldly demon. What did Hongshe mean? The otherworldly demonic tribe was indeed expelled several 10,000 years ago. However, there are still a few remnants living on the continent. They disguise themselves as humans and hide amongst our communities. Hongshe's eyebrows shot up as he waved his hand. Hula. The fog veiling another corner of the round stage cleared, revealing a gigantic stone house. Even though the stone house was tightly sealed, and its interiors couldn't be seen at all, an intense killing intent emanated from within. It felt as though one would be torn apart just by approaching the stone house. What a savage aura. Could it be that an otherworldly demon is currently inside the stone house? I've heard that the otherworldly demonic tribe has an extremely brutal nature. They regard humans as nothing more than mere ants, and they slaughter them without any guilt whatsoever. As such, an exceptionally dense killing intent lingers around them. This killing intent made it impossible for an ordinary human to approach them. They would simply faint from fright during the encounter, let alone kill them. Even across a stone house, the the killing intent emanated is already so astounding. How powerful must the otherworldly demons really be? Feeling the aura coming from within the stone house, everyone's faces warped in shock. Fearsome. All those who were on the round stage were all 4-star master teacher. Even so, the killing intent emanated from within the stone house was sufficient to render their legs wobbly. How powerful must the otherworldly demons be then? The otherworldly demons are callous and cunning. For their growth, they are willing to even devour their own kind. In their eyes, humans are just lower-tier lifeforms, mere prey for them. Hongsha harumphed. This fellow here has been hiding in Hongfeng Empire, and he had killed at least several thousand humans there. It took me 3 years before I managed to capture him. Even though I've used the golden soul lock to seal his root bone, making it impossible for him to exert much strength, the killing intent that he had tempered over countless years still remains. He could easily exert immense pressure on one's soul and draw out the deepest fear in one. Putting aside 4-star pinnacle master teachers like you all, even half 5-star master teachers would hesitate to face him directly. It is similar to a human meeting a tiger. Even the latter didn't make a move, the former would still instinctively feel fear, and strength would drain from their body. This was a matter of courage. If one doesn't even have the courage to approach a tiger, how could he possibly ever kill one? If a master teacher doesn't dare to approach an otherworldly demon, then no matter how far he advances as a master teacher, it would be for naught. The courage test is simple. You just have approach him, and your courage will be judged by how far close you get to him. The requirement for clearing this test is 5 meters. Those who fail to meet this requirement will be eliminated. Waving his hands, Hongsha flicked his finger. Kuala. The walls of the stone house immediately burst apart, and a 3-meter-tall savage-looking beast appeared before everyone. Honglong. As soon as the beast came into view, a violent aura abruptly diffused into the surroundings. Some of the audience seated closer to the round stage suddenly felt an intense vertigo striking their mind, and their vision went dark. They had instinctively fainted out of fright. The master teachers on the stage weren't doing much better either. Song Chao and the other master teachers' faces turned pale, and their lips took on a shade of purple. In the past, the otherworldly demonic tribe had enslaved humans, and if not for Kongsha creating the master teacher pavilion and eventually expelling them from the master teacher continent, the entire continent would still be subjected to their tyranny. Perhaps such primal fear had been deeply imprinted into human instincts, but very few were able to withstand the blow to their soul from the sight of an otherworldly demon. This is an otherworldly demon? Zhong Xian's eyebrows twitched. The fellow before him looked like a gigantic savage beast. Bloodthirst seemed to exude from every single inch of its body, inducing the feeling that one would be torn to shreds if one were to try to approach it. Putting aside the other master teachers, even Zhong Xian found it difficult to approach the otherworldly demon within a 5-meter radius. Fearsome. It was no wonder the master teacher pavilion dared not let down their guard despite several 10,000 years having passed since the disappearance of the otherworldly demons. They were indeed worthy of such wariness from the master teacher pavilion. He is bound and unable to move, so you need not worry of being harmed. The time limit is half an incense's time, and those who are unable to get within 5 meters of him will be eliminated, after which, Hongsha lit an incense and waved his hands. The time starts now. Hearing that the test had started, the crowd on top of the round stage began advancing toward the beast with a grave look on their faces. Zhong Xian followed behind them as well, but with just a single step, his face abruptly lost all color. Just this single step had subjected him to twofold the pressure from before. The savage killing intent lingering in the air stripped his legs of its strength, rendering him unable to proceed further. He glanced at the others around him, and they didn't seem to be in a much better condition than him. Sweat covered their foreheads, and their faces were as pale as a sheet of paper. Forcefully taking another step forward, the pressure intensified yet again. It was as if he was a lone boat standing before a huge storm. Powerful waves rushed at him, threatening to sink him at any moment. At the same time, it was as if he was standing right at the edge of a cliff. A single step forward would mean plummeting into Avsi and subjected to an eternity of suffering. Under such circumstances, even 10 meters would be difficult, not to mention 5 meters. Initially, Zhongxian thought that this test would be a walk in the park, but it turned out to be tougher than he had expected. It seemed that with his willpower itself, it would be impossible for him to pass this step. Advancing another step forward, only 10 competitors remained alongside him. Let me try driving my zhenqi. Taking yet another step forward, Zhongxian felt as though he was coming to the limit of his endurance. Thus, he decided to drive his zhenqi. He didn't use his zhenqi to ward off the killing intent beforehand so as to test his own limits. But regrettably, 4 steps seemed to be it. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't take a single inch forward. Who? As the Heaven's Path zhenqi flowed through his body, the pressure weighing down on him immediately disappeared, and the tenseness he felt faded. That energy that threatened to rip him apart a moment ago felt nothing more than a gentle breeze on him at this moment. As I expected, the Heaven's Path zhenqi is indeed capable of neutralizing killing intent. The Heaven's Path zhenqi possessed no attribute whatsoever, but this allowed it to neutralize all types of attributes of all types. Zhongxian had previously guessed that driving the Heaven's Path zhenqi would neutralize the killing intent from the otherworldly demons, and fortunately, it seemed like he was spot on. He secretly peeked at the others different from him. The others had been driving their zhenqi right from their start, but that did little to alleviate their pale complexion. But even so, with their sheer determination, those at the front were already approaching the 10-meter mark. Incredible. Seeing how they were able to proceed so far despite being unable to neutralize the killing intent effectively with their zhenqi, a hint of respect appeared on Zhongxian's face. It was no wonder they were known as geniuses, and why Pavilion Master Kang didn't think well of them. They did possess the qualities worthy of their evaluation. If not for Zhongxian cheating through his Heaven's Path zhenqi, it was hard to tell whether he could have traveled further than them. Relieved on the immense pressure on him, Zhongxian's thoughts gradually grew lively. Could the immense pressure exerted by the otherworldly demon be considered as a battle technique as well? Given how everyone was so frightened such that it was difficult for them to approach the otherworldly demon, the latter was clearly utilizing some kind of ability to exert pressure on one's soul. Even if this ability couldn't be considered as a battle technique, it should be close to one. Given so, is it possible for the Library of Heaven's Path to peer into the flaws of the otherworldly demon? Flaws. Zhongxian willed. Who? A book materialized in the Library of Heaven's Path. Chapter 579. Zhongxian. In a daze he was only trying his luck, but to his delight, it actually worked. Excited, Zhongxian's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly flipped through its contents. The offspring of an otherworldly life form and spirit beast. Born in Wangyuan Mountain of Hongfeng Empire. Cultivation of transcendent mortal 5-dan consonant spirit realm. Flaws. He isn't a purebred otherworldly demon but a progeny with a spirit beast. Zhongxian blinked his eyes. To think that this fellow, who was powerful enough to halt the advancement of a 4-star master teacher with its disposition in itself, was just a hybrid. If that was the case, how powerful must a purebred be? Not to mention, to actually breed with a spirit beast. The tastes of the otherworldly demonic tribe sure was heavy. The thought of satisfying one's physical needs with that gigantic and swollen body of a spirit beast. Zhongxian couldn't help but shiver in disgust. But even so, this fellow is indeed strong. Based on the information in the book, the other party's physical body and soul were extremely powerful, such that it would be able to easily rival master teachers of the similar cultivation realm, or rather, master teachers who hadn't been through special training to cope with its overwhelming killing intent wouldn't be able to even get close to it. It was no wonder the master teacher Pavilion was so fearful of the otherworldly demon tribe. There was a clear and huge difference in the innate talent between humans and the otherworldly demon tribe. My Heaven's Path zhenqi doesn't fear the pressure he exerts. I'll just approach a 5-meter radius around him and remain there for a moment. Zhongxian had just destroyed Hongsha's ghost domain illusory city, thus putting him at the tip of others' tongues. Even though he could clear this test easily, he felt that he shouldn't cause too much of a fuss this time round. In any case, it was just the preliminary selections and there was no ranking for this. It would suffice as long as he passed the test. There was no need for him to show off. Thinking so, Zhongxian lifted his gaze to look at the others in the surroundings. In the time that he spent browsing through the book, the others had already gotten ahead of him. There were quite a few who were in proximity to the huge beast already, just a few steps away to reaching the 5-meter mark. Even though their movements looked very strained, their ability to get to such proximity reflected their courage and determination. It was no wonder why they were the representatives of their respective powers. They did possess extraordinary mental fortitude and talent. That Luo Xian is leading the group. Walking at the forefront was Luo Xian from Fleeting Cloud Sect. He was listed to be the #1 contender for the champion placing in the book Pavilion Master Kang showed him, and it did seem to be very plausible at this moment. As long as one were to get into a 5-meter radius of the otherworldly demon, one would be considered to have passed the test. As for Song Chao, he was in the middle of the entire group. On the other hand, Ruo Huan Gongzi exceeded Zhong Xian's expectations. Surprisingly, he was amongst the group at the front. Should I go over now, or should I wait a little longer? Forget it, I'm in no hurry anyway. I should first look through that fellow's flaws first. Seeing that no one had reached the 5-meter mark yet, Zhong Xian decided to continue reading the book first. There were many flaws detailed on the hybrid otherworldly demon in the book in the Library of Heaven's Path, so it was taking Zhong Xian a little longer to finish reading through it. In any case, he didn't want to catch too much attention by being the first to clear the test anyway. Thus, he decided to wait a little longer. Beneath the stage, Ruo Huan seems to be faring well. To think that he would achieve such outstanding results right from the start. Elder Su stroked his beard as he said, "Indeed. The otherworldly demonic tribe sure is fearsome. I don't think that I could achieve his current results even if I were to head up." Ling Shi sighed. It was their first time meeting an otherworldly demon as well. They were already feeling stifled from the intense killing intent even though they were beneath the stage. It was difficult for them to imagine the pressure that was weighing down on the competitors at the moment. It seems like the advice I told him worked after all. Hearing the compliments of his two friends, Pavilion Master Kang smiled. "Oh, what did you tell him to motivate him so much as to rush straight into the top few placing?" Su Shu and Ling Shi asked curiously. They couldn't imagine any advice that could induce such a huge change in one. Even though Ruo Huan Gongzi did improve greatly in the past 2 months, he was still a distance away from matching up to the top geniuses from the other sects and empires. I told him that there's nothing he has to be worried about, and he should just give it his all. After all, is there anything in this world that is more fearsome than Zhongshe? Since he doesn't even fear Zhongshe, why should he hesitate over anything? Pavilion Master Kang stroked his beard. Cough cough. Su Shi and Ling Shi staggered. They were rendered speechless by the words of their old friend. But giving it some thoughts, while these words were indeed a little peculiar, it was indeed good advice. A fellow who could collapse even the ghost domain illusory city in 2 to 3 minutes. If Ruo Huan Gongzi didn't even fear such a monster, what did he have to fear from the other geniuses out there? Just that. To use Zhongshe to suppress the fear toward otherworldly demons. Why does it feel as though something is wrong? After a moment of speechlessness, Su Shi suddenly frowned and said, "Right, why isn't Zhongshe moving? Could he be at his limit?" Zhongshe proceeded rather swiftly initially, but after advancing 4 steps, he abruptly came to a stop and hadn't moved since. It had been several minutes since then. Could it be that he was unable to withstand the pressure from the otherworldly demon? Even though he possesses astounding capability, he's still much too young. It's his first time meeting an otherworldly demon, and it's unavoidable that he would freeze in fear. Ling Shi shook his head. "I don't know what's going on either. Actually, I thought of the same thing too, but what I'm more worried about is that." Pavilion Master Kang shook his head. He might cause something huge once more. Cause something huge? I think it's unlikely for that to happen. Given the strength of the otherworldly demon, even you and I wouldn't be a match for it, and he's currently only at Transcendent Mortal 3 Dan Pinnacle. Besides, the goal of the test is just to approach the otherworldly demon. How could any problem occur from this? Su Shi shook his head. "There's no need for you to worry about this." "I hope so." Pavilion Master Kang nodded, and just as he was about to speak, he suddenly froze. Then, lifting a finger up to the stage, he exclaimed, "How can that be?" Hearing the anxiousness in the latter's voice, Su She and Ling She hurriedly turned their gazes over, and their eyes narrowed uncontrollably. As Luo Xian and the others stepped into a 5-meter mark, the otherworldly demon, who had his eyes shut all along, opened abruptly, and a sinister light gleamed in his blood-red eyes. To dare use me as a test of courage, you are courting death. A voice boomed as though thunder, rattling everyone's soul. The immense body of the otherworldly demon shook, and in an instant, everyone abruptly felt as though they were plunged into a storm. Ah! The few master teachers standing at the very front cried out in agony simultaneously. Their bodies lost all strength and they fell helplessly to the ground from fright. Luo Xian wasn't spared either. His body stiffened, and he looked as though his soul had escaped from his body. You lowly creatures, how dare you capture and use me? I'll devour every single one of you. Roaring furiously, the otherworldly demon's glaring red lips parted, revealing rows after rows of sharp teeth. The sight of it left goosebumps rising through one's body, inducing a sensation as though one would be torn to shreds just by approaching him. Ah! I'm not going to compete anymore. Before the otherworldly demon could finish his words, a pale-faced master teacher abruptly screamed as he scrambled off the stage. A pool of pungent fluid was left in his wake. With a precedent, the second and the third soon emerged. 4 4-star master teacher geniuses to actually be reduced to such a state. The crowd below fell completely silent. But even so, no one thought that they were cowardly. After all, none of them could say that they would do better when put in such a position as well. The otherworldly demon was already fearsome when it was idle. Now that it was roaring and baring its fangs, it would be wonder if the others could hold on. To think that even trash life forms like you all would be able to rule over the continent, the world sure has regress. Seeing some of the participating master teachers escape and the rest collapsed on the floor, the otherworldly demon sneered. Just as he was going to drive all of them away in a single breath, he saw a young man standing quietly at a distance away, seemingly in a daze. In a daze. Aren't all of you here to test your courage? What the heck are you dazing off for? Besides, I've been roaring here and there, and I even intensified the killing aura to the maximum. Even a half 5-star master teacher would find it hard to withstand the pressure. And yet, a little fellow like you is actually unfazed. With a livid expression, the otherworldly demon focused all of its killing intent on the young man and roared. Little fellow, do you think you are courageous? Let's see how courageous you can be after you're dead. Hualala. The voice, tinged with overpowering killing intent, swept across the entire stage as though a hurricane. It was so strong that a 4-star master teacher beneath the stage even fell off his seat and fainted. All of the 4-star master teachers collapsed on the ground, huddled their bodies together in fear, not daring to even breathe loudly. But the young man whom he focused all of his killing intent on was still standing silently on the spot with all of his attention devoted to dazing off. It seemed as though the other party didn't even notice his attack. I'll kill you. Not expecting that he, despite being a proud otherworldly demon, would actually be disregarded by such a young master teacher, his rage was unleashed. Back then, Hongsha had to deploy more than 70 master teachers before he was able to capture him. And in that battle, he had managed to slay at least 20 of them and severely injured another 30. Even Hong Shu, a 5-star master teacher, was afraid of him. And yet, a 4-star primary master teacher actually dared to disregard him? This was too much. Boom. An even more powerful aura gushed into the surroundings, and upon feeling the killing intent infused into the aura, even Hong Shu's face paled. Yet, the young man before him continued on in his daze. It was as if nothing mattered before him. Neither the pressure nor the killing intent he exerted was able to faze the young man at all. I knew that Zhongshe would surely stir something up, but still to think that it really happened. The faces of Pavilion Master Kang, Su She, and the other elders paled as they trembled uncontrollably. Naturally, the young man was Zhongxian. Despite the odds, they thought that something would happen since Zhongshe was involved. And as though not to let down their expectations, something did indeed happen. The other party was an otherworldly demon. Even they themselves found it hard to cope with that overpowering killing intent. Yet, even though the bulk of the other party's killing intent was focused on you, you are actually dazing off. Could you at least give a reaction, even if it's only out of respect for your opponent? To be dazing away on a battlefield like this, what in the world are you up to? It can't be that Zhongshe has fainted from fear. Fainted? If he has fainted, how can he still be standing? Furthermore, he was still looking around a moment ago. But if he is still conscious, what can he be doing? The otherworldly demon is exerting so much pressure that he is about to spew blood. How can there be no reaction on Zhongshe's part at all? I have no idea as well. They weren't the only ones who noticed that something was amiss. The other master teachers and the crowd beneath also noticed the peculiarity, and they were staring at one another in bewilderment, confused over the situation unfolding before them. The otherworldly demon, with its innate ability to instill fear into a soul, left all of the competitors paralyzed on the floor, not daring to even utter a word. And yet, despite focusing its attention on Zhongshe, roaring relentlessly and baring its fangs, the latter remained completely impassive. Big brother, do you really not fear the otherworldly demon, or are you dead already? Chapter 580. Kill yourself. Just as everyone had seen, the otherworldly demon was truly on the verge of falling into a frenzy. Even if you don't fear, you need not make it so obvious, do you? I'm already putting in all my effort into it. Even if just to acknowledge my effort, you should at least give a reaction. Look at how everyone above and beneath the stage has collapsed on the ground. You are the only one standing there, unfazed, at this point. Aren't you being a little too disrespectful to me, your opponent? I'll kill you. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Roaring once more, the tall otherworldly demon gritted his teeth and a mouthful of blood spewed from his mouth. His eyes grew even redder, and the callous aura shrouding him intensified. This is bad. The otherworldly demon is activating Blood Berserk. Blood Berserk. Indeed. On top of their powerful physical bodies and souls, the otherworldly demon are also capable of burning their blood essence in exchange for raising their fighting prowess temporarily. I've read the history of the war against the otherworldly demons written by Master Teacher Zheng Xiao, and it states that many Master Teachers have died under such attacks. Then what should we do? I don't know either. However, since Hongshe has sealed his root bone with the golden soul lock, he shouldn't be able to exert any strength. Seeing the huge fellow going into a rampage, a look of worry appeared on the faces of the knowing master teachers below the stage. An otherworldly demon in his normal state was already sufficiently frightening. How fearsome would he be once he went into a berserk state? Hongshe grasped a weapon tightly in his hands. As soon as that fellow made a move, he would slaughter the other party without any hesitation. But even so, at the current moment, he was still confident in the ability of the golden soul lock in sealing the otherworldly demon's movements. As long as the otherworldly demon was unable to break out of his restraints, it shouldn't be a problem at all. After all, the main point of this test was to assess the courage of the participants. As such, there was no need for him to make a move as long as there was no threat to the participant's life. Besides, it took him a lot of effort to capture this otherworldly demon alive. He was hoping to take him to the headquarters to claim his reward. If he were to kill him, he wouldn't be able to claim any reward at all. Hong Long. Amidst everyone's frightened gaze, the otherworldly demon finally activated Blood Berserk fully and roared at Zhongxian. Die! The killing intent and the pressure harnessed within the roar seemed as though thunder booming from the highest heaven. Jia, the round stage creaked, seemingly unable to withstand the pressure. All of the master teachers and cultivators around the young man trembled uncontrollably in fear, not daring to move in the slightest. And yet, Zhongxian still remained in his daze, completely indifferent to the other party's offense. You! The otherworldly demon was about to explode in rage. After struggling for a moment, fresh blood spurted from his mouth once more. Stepping forcefully against the ground, he advanced forward. Even though he was incapable of fighting due to his root bone being sealed by the golden soul lock, he was still able to move around. The only reason why he'd remained stationary previously was in fear that Hongshe would kill him. But panicked and enraged, he couldn't care as much anymore. I'll kill you. Huala. With his gigantic head at a distance less than 50 meters before Zhongxian, it roared furiously. Even at such a far distance away, the immense pressure the otherworldly demon exerted could leave countless trembling helplessly in fear. At such a close proximity, it would surely feel as though one was already in death's embrace, leaving one completely terror-stricken and hysterical. And yet, Zhongxian remained completely motionless, still in his daze. Zhongshe. Hongshe couldn't stand looking at it anymore. What the heck are you doing? Even if you are dazing off, isn't this going a bit too far? Ah! Hearing someone shout his name, Zhongxian finally returned to his senses. The introduction and the flaws concerning the otherworldly demon was simply too long and too shocking. Despite the vast knowledge Zhongxian had gathered through the books he had read before, he still found himself astonished by its contents, thus resulting in his attention being completely absorbed in the book. As for the other party's roaring, Zhongxian thought that the fellow was simply trying to scare some other participant, and as such, he didn't pay it much heed. As soon as he drew his consciousness out from the book, he suddenly saw a hideous face right before him. Alarmed, he sent a slap right at the other party. Pa! A crisp sound echoed across the round stage. Everyone was dumbfounded. The otherworldly demon's eyes also widened in frenzy. In order to exert further pressure on the other party's soul, he burned his blood essence to intensify his killing intent. He even went to the extent of laboriously making his way here just so to teach this arrogant brat a lesson. And yet, not only did the other party remain completely unfazed, the other party even slapped him. You lowly human, die. With his mind clouded with wrath, the otherworldly demon couldn't care less about the golden soul lock any longer. He raised his immense fist and sent it right toward the young man before him. Hoo-hoo! A piercing wind screamed in the surroundings. With his root bone sealed, the otherworldly demon could only tap into the strength of his physical body. But even so, blessed with strong innate physique, his physical strength wasn't one that a transcendent mortal 3-dan cultivator could withstand. You beast, you're seeking death. Seeing how the otherworldly demon actually dared to make a move, Hongshe's eyebrows shot up. Raising his sword, he prepared to make a move. But before he could do anything, Zhongxian leaped to the side, dodging the attack. Then, with a displeased look on his face, he glared at the otherworldly demon. Audacious! Who are you calling lowly? Flinging his sleeves, Zhongxian stood upright. His master-teacher robe danced along with the slight tug of the wind, creating an impression of an incredible expert. As an offspring of an otherworldly demon and a dust-shell beast, your blood is impure and your energy is adulterated. Not to mention, the technique you use to exert pressure on others' soul is filled with flaws. Given how you can't even deal with an ordinary human like me, what rights do you have to say that humans are lowly? You! Not expecting the person before him to identify his origins, the otherworldly demon was stunned. For a moment, he forgot his rage against the other party. What? Is there anything wrong about what I said? With his hands behind his back, Zhongxian slowly walked up to the otherworldly demon. It's one thing for your blood to be adulterated, but you didn't even receive the heritage that an otherworldly demon should possess at birth. To grow stronger, you had to study the human language and practice human cultivation techniques. And yet, you dare to say that humans are lowly? What gave you the confidence to utter such words? The otherworldly demon subconsciously took a step back in fear. What is going on? Seeing how Zhongshe, who was still dazing off a moment ago, lecturing the otherworldly demon as soon as he came to again, the crowd stared at one another as though they had seen a ghost. Even Hongshe was bewildered by the situation as well. This fellow actually wasn't a pure-blooded otherworldly demon? Given how he, despite being the one who captured the otherworldly demon, didn't notice it, how did Zhongshe know about it? And how could he have known that the other half of the other party's blood came from the dust-shell beast? More importantly, despite being a 5-star master teacher, he was unaware of the heritage of otherworldly demons. And yet, this fellow actually knew about it. Could Yang-She have taught him that? It wouldn't be surprising for an 8-star master teacher like Yang-She to know of such deep secrets of the otherworldly demons. Despite reaching 5-star, Hongshe had yet to advance to even higher master teacher pavilions, and as such, he didn't know much about such matters. You were born in a village on Wangyuan Mountain of Hongfeng Empire, and you were adopted and raised by humans. Before 20, other than your large head, you were no different from a human, and you didn't know about your unique heritage either. Yet, in a minor dispute with a villager, you killed the latter. And when the parents who raised you questioned you about the matter, out of rage, you awakened your bloodline as an otherworldly demon and killed them as well. Zhongxian glanced at the otherworldly demon. Am I right? The otherworldly demon trembled in fear. He was indeed raised by humans. It was a poor village, and the villagers there led a simple life. Perhaps it was due to this that they possessed an innocence contrary to the depravity existent in cities. Even though he had a huge appetite from young due to his larger stature, his parents treated him kindly. No matter how poor they were, they never allowed him to starve. There was once when it snowed 5 days consecutively, and the house ran out of food. Bearing the risk of a snowstorm, his parents went out to hunt, only to come back grievously injured with an ordinary hare in hand and several wild vegetables. The rabbit wasn't large, and it wasn't sufficient to go around the family. In order to not let him starve, the entire rabbit went to him while his parents ate only the plucked wild vegetable. Just the thought of it evoked sympathy for his parents. Even though they were your foster parents, they still doted on you as though you were their real child. But how did you repay them? After awakening your bloodline, you slew the entire village, including your buddies, parents, and kin, and you devoured them all. With a livid expression and sharp eyes, Zhongxian pushed on. Not only so, you even torched the entire village into ashes. Let me ask you, have you ever felt the slightest regret for your actions? The otherworldly demon trembled once more. Even though he had inherited the brutal nature of the otherworldly demonic tribe, he still grew up amongst humans, and he was taught etiquette and shame. These past memories poked at him as though a thorn in his heart, agitating him constantly, leaving him ashamed. Regret. I did regret my actions, but so what? They were the ones who humiliated me. They said that I looked inhumane and that I was a beast. That's why I killed them all. Was I wrong in exacting my vengeance? The otherworldly demon roared through gritted teeth. You don't think you have done wrong? All right then. After killing your foster parents and torching the village, to fill your stomach, you headed to the closest young city. Due to your tall stature and sturdy build, you were recruited to become a bodyguard for a wealthy family. Your employers provided you with decent food, lodging, and even imparted a cultivation technique to you. And yet, how did you repay them? With an ice-cold voice, Zhongxian continued, out of lust for the young mistress of the family, you raped and killed her. And out of fear that your employer would exact vengeance on you upon learning of the matter, you killed his entire clan of 78 people. It's a pity that that old man still believed in you even when your sword was placed right on his throat. Regarding this, there's no mistake in my words, right? There were many flaws in the soul attacks from the otherworldly demon, and it originated from these doubts he harbored in his mind. It was due to the conflict and regret he felt that his temperament slowly declined, resulting in his inability to unleash his full strength. Otherwise, given how fearsome the otherworldly demonic tribe was, it wouldn't be possible for Hong Shi and the other master teachers to capture a mature otherworldly demon so easily. The otherworldly demon trembled yet again. When the master teacher pavilion sent men after you, you slew more than 20 master teacher, and even when you were captured by Hong Shi, you still refused to repent. You attempted to escape and recuperate by killing others to absorb their strength. A bastard like you who is neither a human, a beast, nor an otherworldly demon actually dares to claim that humans are lowly. Let me direct the same question to you once more. What right do you have to say that humans are lowly? Before the other party could speak, Zhongxian pushed further on. His voice carried immense authority that weighed down the otherworldly demon's soul. Despite being an otherworldly demon, you failed to be acknowledged by your tribe. Living in the human world, you ended up killing your kin and friends, thus becoming a scorn of humanity. What right do you have to continue existing on the face of this world? Flinging his sleeves, Zhongxian spoke with a compelling strength in his voice. Kill yourself. The otherworldly demon's body trembled, and his eyes turned into blank voids. Indeed, What right do I have to continue existing on the face of this world? Pa. Lifting his palm, he struck his forehead. His gigantic body swayed and collapsed lifelessly to the floor. Chapter 581. The test is on reading books. He committed suicide. Zhongshe actually convinced the otherworldly demon to commit suicide. The crowd went completely silent. The otherworldly demonic tribe was known for being terrifying, and the one before them was a consonant spirit realm expert. Except for Hongshe, there was no one else present who was a match for him. And yet, the other party was actually convinced by Zhongshe to commit suicide. Did it have to be so fantastical? Could it be that we're dreaming? It's impartation of heaven's will. Isn't it an ability that only could be executed in the midst of a lesson? As long as the content of one's words are logical and without flaws, one can infuse one's soul depth into one's words to beguile another to do things they might have never done. It seemed like what Zhongshe said previously was correct, and through such, he managed to agitate the otherworldly demon to a corner and force him to commit suicide. Impartation of heaven's will can actually convince a person to commit suicide. Doesn't that mean that master teachers can easily kill one as long as they can find something true to speak about? It's not that easy. Not only must the matter be true, it must also be aligned with the internal thoughts of the person in question for it to be effective. Take cultivation for example. The main reason why impartation of heaven's will is effective on the cultivation of most cultivators is due to their subconscious minds acknowledging the need to cultivate, and thus, they would instinctively accept the effects of impartation of heaven's will. Even though this otherworldly demon possessed a savage nature, he was still raised by humans, and inculcated within him are our values. The guilt he felt over his actions was the main reason why Zhongshe was able to persuade him to commit suicide. I see. However, to be able to beguile a consonant spirit realm otherworldly demon, even the soul depth of a 4-star pinnacle master teacher would be insufficient. Exactly how high is Zhongshe's soul depth? 15.0. 16.0. A moment later, the crowd below also learnt of the ins and outs of the matter, and a commotion broke out. It was clear that the reason why the otherworldly demon committed suicide was due to the effects of impartation of heaven's will. But the soul depth of a 4-star master teacher would only allow one to beguile a transcendent mortal 4-dan expert. A 5-dan expert would require an even higher soul depth. Not to mention, the otherworldly demon before them possessed an extraordinarily powerful soul. Even so, he was still beguiled. Since that was the case, exactly how high was Zhongshe's soul depth then? This was way too fearsome. He was actually killed by words. The sight before them sent tears flowing down Pavilion Master Kang and the other master teachers' faces. They thought that Zhongshe's daze was stirring up trouble in itself, but it seemed like they were underestimating the latter. Of the 2 tests that had been conducted, he wrecked the both of them entirely. If they didn't know better, they would have thought his primary motive here was to stir trouble. Beneath the stage, Ruo Huan Gongzi, Luo Xian, and the others were rendered speechless. They had witnessed how fearsome that huge fellow was for themselves, and they knew that they would have never been able to stand their ground against such frightening killing intent. And yet, not only was Zhongshe fine, he even convinced the latter to commit suicide. Are you sure that this fellow is truly 10 years younger than us? Could he be a 6-star or 7-star master teacher in disguise? The mouth of Liao Wuji, who was looking down on Zhongxian just a moment ago, twitched in fright, and he didn't dare to utter a single more word. Disregarding the thoughts of the crowd, Zhongxian glanced at the massive carcass on the ground and heaved a sigh of relief. The reason why he had been dazing off previously was due to the immense shock he felt from reading the vile deeds this fellow had committed. He was already enraged from reading those events, and upon seeing how that fellow knew no repent, even going to the extent of insulting humanity as a whole, he couldn't hold back his rage any longer and utilized the impartation of heaven's will to kill the other part. His current soul depth had reached 16.1, which was at the level of most 5-star master teacher. Even so, it still wasn't easy for him to beguile an otherworldly demon to commit suicide, and it had exhausted him greatly. If not for a strong will driving him on, he might have collapsed then. Zhongxian possessed 0.1 soul depth at the very start. The usage of 2 golden pages increased by soul depth by 10-0, the soul tempering of a mentor's calligraphy 1-0, 2 occasions of acknowledgement of celestial master teacher 3-0, soul enlightenment 2-0, thus adding up to a total of 16-1. But it was fortunate that he succeeded. Taking a deep breath, he conditioned the internal state of his body. After which, he turned around to look at Hongshe, only to see the latter's mouth twitching uncontrollably. The current Hongshe was indeed on the verge of a mental breakdown. That ghost domain illusory city was already his entire fortune. After it was destroyed, he was banking on bringing this otherworldly demon to the headquarters and submit it to recoup his losses. And yet, in the blink of an eye, the otherworldly demon was convinced to commit suicide. Big brother, are you trying to drive me into a corner as well? Are you here to participate in the master-teacher tournament, or are you here to cause trouble? Besides, we're only halfway through the courage test. How am I supposed to continue on with the test under such circumstances? It was one thing for the first test to end like this, but for the second test to be like that as well. Are you actually trying to annul the master-teacher tournament? Just as Hongshe was considering whether he should kick that fellow out of the master-teacher tournament, the latter's voice sounded. Hongshe, what do I do with the carcass? Otherworldly demons are callous in nature. Killing one of them can be considered to be a meritorious contribution to society. You don't have to worry about the carcass, someone will clear it later on. Even though Hongshe's heart was bleeding, he could only force a smile on and reply in such a manner. Anyway, there was nothing he could do anymore. The otherworldly demon was already dead, and there was no point pursuing the matter. On the contrary, it would only make the master teachers think that he was siding with the otherworldly demons. With the death of the otherworldly demon, the courage test is unable to proceed on as planned. So, with the exception of the trio who escaped earlier, all remaining 53 master teachers on the stage shall proceed on to the next test. Knowing that there was no point feeling conflicted over this, Hongshe forced a smile on his face and proceeded on with the tournament. Yes. Hearing those words, the unkempt master teachers who were lying on the floor stood up and heaved a sigh of relief. They shot a glance of gratitude toward Zhongshe. If not for this Zhongshe, most of them would have been unable to clear the test. It was fortunate for them that Zhongshe had caused such a huge uproar. Ignoring everyone's reactions, Hongshe announced, moving on to the third test, this shall be a test of wisdom. Wisdom forms the basis for a cultivator to learning new knowledge. The higher one's wisdom is, the stronger one's capability to learn, and thus, the greater potential a master teacher wield. Don't worry, this test won't be as dangerous as the one before. It only involves reading. Reading? Everyone was taken aback. There's a total of 56 bookshelves here, and there are 5,000 books on each shelf. These are from my individual collection, and I can assure you that the books on each shelf are identical and it is impossible for any competitor here to have read them before. The subjects the books span from cultivation techniques, battle techniques, rearing spirit beasts, all the way to my personal comprehension toward cultivation. I'll give you 2 hours to browse and memorize the contents of these books. With a wave of his hands, the fog covering the center of the stage vanished, and row after row of bookshelves appeared before everyone's sight. Each shelf was completely filled with books, or to be exact, 5,000 each. The rules behind this test is simple, you just have to read the books on the bookshelf. In 2 hours, I'll use a unique method to test your understanding of the content, and through this, determine your wisdom, Hongshe said. This is the test. Hearing the rules, Zhongxian scratched his head in embarrassment. He might not be confident in anything else, but in terms of reading. To put it in terms of a marathon, he was innumerable streets ahead of all other competitors. Even an 8-star master teacher would have to kneel in defeat before him, for this to be the test. He felt as though he was bullying the other competitors. Forget it. I'll just intentionally make a few mistakes when answering the questions later on. Anyway, my goal is just to pass the test. And this time, I've to make sure that I don't break anything else of Hongshe's. Zhongxian made up his mind. He did feel guilty for messing up the test, thus causing the other competitors to be unable to take the test. But he really didn't do it intentionally. In the first test, he only planned to stop the formation. How could he have known that his clone would accidentally exert too much strength and destroy the stone pedestal? As for the second test, there was no one in the world who would able to hold themselves back after hearing of the atrocities the otherworldly demon had committed. Honestly, Zhongxian felt that he had let the other party off the hook too easily by allowing him to commit suicide. If this wasn't the master-teacher pavilion, Zhongxian would have surely punished that otherworldly demon personally. But of course, it was likely that Zhongxian wasn't a match for the other party, so it was fortunate that that wasn't the case. Regardless of whether he had done so intentionally or not, it was the truth that he had caused immense damage in his wake for the previous 2 tests. Thus, he was determined not to allow the same mistake to occur in this test. At most, he would just read fewer books, or perhaps, intentionally make some mistakes in the answering of the question. It would suffice as long as he passes the test. Low profile. Zhongxian thought that it would be best to keep a low profile and not attract too much attention. If the others were to learn of his thoughts, they would surely burst into tears. You call this keeping a low profile? Look at Hong Shuo, he's already on the verge of going insane. If you call this low profile, all of the celebrities in the world would have been fired from their jobs already. Gesturing grandly, Hong Shuo declared, "All right, choose a bookshelf each. The time starts now. Quick. Memorize 5,000 books within 2 hours? How can that possibly be done? Are you a fool?" Hong Shuo didn't say that we must take in the content of all 5,000 books. We just have to remember as many as we could. Indeed. Even though, as 4-star master teachers, we possess photographic memory, it would still be difficult for us to memorize the content of a few hundred books within this span of time. 5,000 books. Even a 6-star master teacher would be incapable of such a feat. Hearing that the test had started, all of the participants quickly rushed forward to one of the bookshelves. On the other hand, Zhongxian leisurely walked up to the last bookshelf remaining after everyone was done picking their own. The books on the bookshelves were clearly new. Most likely, they were freshly copied over. The labels were a little bizarre, and to Zhongxian's surprise, he truly hadn't seen any of them before. He had collected innumerable books from several libraries, and while it might be an exaggeration to say that even combining the knowledge of everyone present here wouldn't match up to his, it wasn't too far away from the truth. Given the huge collection of books he had read, Zhongxian actually hadn't seen any one of these 5,000 books before. It seemed like Hong Shuo had truly put a lot of effort into this tournament. Gently sliding his finger across the books, Zhongxian collected them into the Library of Heaven's Path. There are loads of transcendent mortal 4-dan cultivation technique manuals here. Taking a closer look into the books that he had collected, Zhongxian's eyes lit up. There were actually several hundred transcendent mortal 4-dan cultivation technique manuals on the bookshelf. He had been struggling to find cultivation technique manuals of this tier, and it was a huge stroke of luck that he managed to find them here. With so many books here, he might be able to compile a complete clarifying turbidity realm Heaven's Path divine art, thus inducing a leap in his cultivation. Compile. On the outside, Zhongxian causally picked out a book and began flipping through it. However, his consciousness was actually immersed in the Library of Heaven's Path. The Library of Heaven's Path shook, and all of the transcendent mortal 4-dan cultivation technique manuals which he had collected before gathered together. Before long, a brand new book appeared before his eyes. Chapter 582, Day's Book Reading Technique Beneath the Stage. Given that the test is on reading books this time round, Zhongxian shouldn't cause any trouble, right? I think so. Pavilion Master Kang, Su Shi, and the others wiped the cold sweat off their forehead. This Zhongxian seemed to be bent on causing a huge ruckus for every single test he took. It was as if he would feel uncomfortable if he didn't scare them to death. They were initially worried that Zhongxian would cause something in the third round as well, but from the looks of it now, the chances should be near null. After all, unlike the first 2 tests, this test consisted of simply reading. There didn't seem to be any room for Zhongxian to cause any trouble. What is Zhongxian doing? Just as they heaved a sigh of relief, Ling's voice cried out. Alarmed, Pavilion Master Kang and Su Shi leaped from their seats. What's wrong? Did he destroy the bookshelves? Or did he burn the books? The duo quickly turned their sights to Zhongshe, only to see the latter reading peacefully. The shocks that Zhongxian had caused them had left a deep trauma in their hearts. As such, whenever they hear of anything relating to him, they would immediately think that the latter had done something catastrophic. Seeing the tense looks on the duo, Lingshe was speechless. Pointing forward, he said, "That's not it. Rather. Everyone seems to be in a rush to cram as many books in as possible, but why is he standing completely still after grabbing that book?" Pavilion Master Kang and Su She finally understood what was wrong about the scene. They saw Zhongshe walking up to the bookshelf and tracing the books with his fingers, seemingly trying to look a book that interests him. After choosing his book, he flipped it open and entered into a daze again. It was exactly how he'd reacted before the otherworldly demon. Could there be some special significance behind his dazing off? Zhao Feiwu's eyebrows shot up as she exclaimed, "Could this be the daze book reading technique?" Daze book reading technique? Pavilion Master Kang and the others were bewildered by Zhao Feiwu's words. Actually, back when Zhongshe was taking the examination for other occupations, he utilized the beast pummeling taming method, the knockout treatment method, and the formation crushing kick technique. So, I'm wondering if this is another technique of his. Zhao Feiwu had been with Zhongxian for a significant period of time, and she had witnessed many inconceivable means from the latter. Beast pummeling taming method? Knockout treatment method? Formation crushing kick technique? The 3 4-star master teachers glanced at one another in confusion. What the heck are these? I don't seem to understand what you are talking about. Oh, it's actually like that. Zhao Feiwu began explaining the various incidents she had encountered in detail. There's such a thing. Upon hearing of the matters, the 3 master teachers widened their eyes in shock. It felt as though what they had just heard came from a dream. To tame a savage beast just by beating it up, to heal anyone just by knocking them out, to break any formation with just a single kick. Why did it sound like something that had come out of a fantasy novel? It seemed like this fellow truly couldn't be assessed through common sense. Anyone who tried to do so would probably go mad. Since there were so many precedents, perhaps, he might truly have such a unique way of reading books. But even so, if all his staring going to stare at is a single page, surely there would be nothing for him to read and learn. After recovering from the primary shock, more doubts emerged in their minds. No matter how formidable your daze book reading technique is, even if it allows you to comprehend the content within in an instant. If all you are just going to stare at one page the whole time, how are you supposed to read anything else? At the very least, shouldn't you flip the pages of the book? Is Zhongshe giving up on this stage? They weren't the only bewildered ones. There were some among the crowd that noticed this peculiarity, and they were confused by Zhongxian's actions too. In the previous 2 rounds, he had caused so much trouble that even Hongshe was left on the verge of a frenzy. The crowd below must be blind if they couldn't notice his uniqueness. Naturally, such a unique person would have the spotlight on him. The crowd thought that he, just like the other participants, would quickly flip through the books to memorize as many of them as he could. And yet, after picking up a single one, he stopped moving altogether. Wasn't his efficiency a little, way too low? There was no way he could match up to the others with this kind of speed. Did he use up all of his talent in the past 2 rounds? Oblivious to the reactions of the crowd, at this very moment, Zhongxian was staring at the nearly compiled clarifying turbidity realm Heaven's Path divine art with gleaming eyes. He thought that he would only be able to compile it after reaching Huanyu Empire. Never in his dreams did he expect to be able to perfect it through this preliminary selection test. With the cultivation technique perfected and sufficient number of spirit stones in his storage ring, it wasn't a problem for him to reach Transcendent Mortal 4 Dan Pinnacle right now. It was a pity that he was in the midst of the preliminary selection test. If he were to cultivate the Heaven's Path divine art right here, who knows how many eyeballs would pop out from their sockets. Thus, all Zhongxian could do was reread the manual and understand the essence of the cultivation technique entirely. After he was done, he turned his attention to the other books. To think that there would be books on souls here as well. Sweeping through the rest of the 5,000 books, he found quite a few books about soul as well. Most of them were Hongshe's notes on his comprehension of the topic. As a transcendent mortal 6-dan Cosmos Bridge realm expert, Hongsha's possessed a unique interpretation of the topic of souls. Compile. Zhongxian compiled the notes on soul with the techniques Mo Hunsheng gave him. Soon, a book was formed. Transcendent Mortal 5-dan Heaven's Path Soul Art. To think that I would get 2 complete Heaven's Path cultivation technique through this preliminary selection, Zhongxian thought in agitation. He had come with the thought of just getting the Master Teacher tournament over and done with. He didn't expect to be given enough valuable books to perfect a cultivation realm of Heaven's Path Divine Art and Heaven's Path Soul Art. This meant that his fighting prowess could be raised significantly once he found some free time to cultivate. The rest of the books weren't of much use to Zhongxian. He swept across them with his mind, but he couldn't find anything that interested him. Thus, he drew his consciousness out of the library of Heaven's Path. Only 10 minutes have passed. When his consciousness returned, he realized that only 10 minutes had passed. In total, they were given 2 hours. In less than a tenth of the time, Zhongxian had already finished browsing through all of the books. If he were to say that he was done with the test, Hongsha could very possibly faint from shock. But still, he couldn't possibly stand idly here and wait for others to be done. Forget it, since I still have some time, why don't I try memorizing the content in those books as well? Since Zhongxian had nothing better to do now, he decided to try memorizing and deciphering the content of the books as well. But of course, he would be doing so through the library of Heaven's Path. After all, it was much more efficient that way. Upon making this decision, Zhongxian immediately dived straight into action. Immersing his consciousness back to the library of Heaven's Path, he picked up a book and began reading through it. Hualalala. Back then, when he was only at Tongxian Realm, he was already able to read at a speed dozens of times faster in the library of Heaven's Path. With his strengthened soul, this ability of his had been further enhanced. In the time when the master teachers outside read through a handful of books, he was already done memorizing the content of all 5,000 books. As such, Zhongxian turned to the other books in the library of Heaven's Path. In the past few months, Zhongxian had gathered more than 10 million books in the library of Heaven's Path, and he hadn't had the time to browse through them yet. Since he was free now, he decided to take a look at them. Time passed swiftly as his mind was completely immersed in those books. Suddenly, Hongsha declared, "All right, time's up. Everyone, put down the books in your hands." Hearing that time was up, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Withdrawing from the library of Heaven's Path, he put down the book and took a glance at the other competitors. At this moment, everyone looked a little fatigued, and their faces were considerably pale. 2 hours of operating one's mind at full throttle to memorize the content of those books had taken a huge toll on them. How many books have you memorized? 820 books. What about you? I did slightly better than you. I managed to memorize 917 books. Putting down the books in their hands, everyone walked to Hongsha. There were some hushed conversations between some of the participants. Given that their soul depths were all beyond 10.0, they possessed photographic memory. Still, it was no easy feat to browse through and memorize all those books. Honestly, 800 to 900 books in 2 hours was the limit for most 4-star master teachers. Ruo Huangongzi walked over and asked, "Zhongsha, how many books did you memorize?" "Me." Fearing that he would scare the other party to death if he were to utter the truth, Zhongxian scratched his head and replied, "It should the same as yours." "Same as mine? I read 1240 books. Did you reach around 1200 books too?" Ruo Huangongzi asked doubtfully. Given how formidable Zhongsha's performance was all along, how could the other party have the same result as him? Ruo Huangongzi found the other party's words hard to believe. I think it should be around that amount." "Right. How will Hongsha assess the number of books we have read?" Zhongxian asked curiously. Since this was a test on wisdom, clearly, they couldn't be assessed just by the number of books they managed to read. More importantly, the participants must be able to memorize and comprehend the content. But how was this going to be tested? After all, they couldn't possibly recite the content of the books they have read line after line given the sheer number of books they have read. "I don't know either. Hongsha should be revealing it soon." Ruo Huangongzi was perplexed too. To be fair, reciting or writing down the content would be the best way. But this is just the preliminary selection. They couldn't possibly drag it out over several days just for this single test. It would be too inefficient. Besides, how many books do they have to memorize to pass the test? Furthermore, the word count in each book was different. If they were to count purely by books, that might introduce so biasedness in the results. And in truth, all of the other participants also shared the same confusion. Is everyone worried about how the test will be carried out? Seemingly noticing everyone's doubts, Hongsha chuckled. Don't worry. Since I've proposed this test, naturally, I have my own way of assessing you. Stroking his beard, Hongsha's eyebrows shot up. Based on my experiments, an average 4-star primary stage master teacher can memorize around 500 books in 2 hours. But of course, as geniuses of your respective power, the expectations of you are much higher. Thus, after much deliberation, I've decided to set the bars at 800 books. Those who fail to memorize 800 books will be eliminated from the tournament. 800 books. Amongst the crowd, around a dozen young men's faces paled. Clearly, the number of books they had read didn't reach that number. But of course, each book is unique, and thus, we have to consider the varying length and the difficulty of the content of each book as well. Thus, while the standard I've set is 800, if you specifically choose to only memorize the thinner and easier books, your score might end up below 600. Hongsha continued, to ensure fairness in this aspect, I've applied for a treasure from the headquarters. The Book of Emptied River. Chapter 583, Book of Emptied River. Book of Emptied River? What is that? I've never heard of it. Given that it's an artifact that Hongsha applied to the headquarters for, it must be extraordinary. Indeed. Hearing of the Book of Emptied River, confusion surfaced on the faces of the master teachers on the stage. No one here had heard of it, and even Pavilion Master Kang, Su Shi, and the others were perplexed over this matter. Seeing the confusion on everyone's faces, Hongsha explained with a smile, as master teachers, everyone should have heard of the saying that knowledge isn't just words or information, it has its own weight as well. I've heard of that saying. Knowledge will reinforce one's mental fortitude and refine one's disposition. The more knowledge accrued, the denser one's soul will become. It's said that back then, Hongsha was able to sink the earth and tilt the oceans with just a single stomp, and that's because the knowledge he harnessed within him encompassed the entire world. Indeed. After Hongsha departed, even though his 72 direct disciple possessed cultivation comparable to him, they weren't capable of exerting the same might as he did. Discussions broke out amidst the crowd. Zhongxian couldn't help but nod his head as well. He didn't know too much about the affairs of Hongsha, but from the books, he learnt that knowledge carried weight as well. Even though knowledge was intangible, it could make a person more cultured and collected. Since knowledge has weight, naturally, it can be measured. And the artifact to do so is the Book of Emptied River. Hongsha continued, empty the river sediment to reveal true gold, part the veiling fog to uncover clear moon. The Book of Emptied River is able to peer through all of one's facades to weigh one's knowledge. This artifact was created by an 8-star master teacher 10,000 years ago, and it harnesses a function to search one's soul. As long as you place your hand on it, it'll determine the weight of the knowledge you have accrued within a certain period of time. Of course, it can only weigh into the knowledge one has accrued, it can't analyze one's thoughts, so there's no need for you to worry. The one I've borrowed from the headquarters is an inferior good, but it is more than enough to check the number of books you have read. Weigh one's knowledge? This. How incredible. Indeed, this is amazing. As expected of an artifact from the headquarter, upon hearing that this artifact was capable of assessing the amount of knowledge one had accrued, everyone was amazed. Usually, if a teacher instructs his student to study, even if the student lazes off, the teacher isn't able to check. But with this artifact, he could simply weigh his student's knowledge and determine whether his student has been diligent or not. This is also the main reason why the Book of Emptied River was created. With a flick of his finger, a book appeared before everyone's eyes. The book was snowy white in color and average in size. However, Its very presence seemed to induce an intense spiritual energy disturbance in the surroundings, indicating that it was no ordinary artifact. Placing the book on the table before him, Hongsha turned to the crowd and explained, "The Book of Emptied River will emanate 7 different colors depending on the amount of knowledge one has accrued within a specific period of time. The colors are namely red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Every rise in color equates to 800 books. Meaning, if the Book of Emptied River glows red, it means that you've passed the examination. If it glows orange, it means that you've managed to memorize the content of 1,600 books, so on and so forth. Thus, you will come up one by one to touch the book. To think that it would be so simple. Given that the artifact was made by an 8-star master teacher, we have no qualms about the fairness of the test." Hearing Hongsha's explanation, everyone came to a realization and nodded their heads. Since it was a treasure from the headquarters, there was definitely no trouble at all. "I'm done for." But contrary to everyone's delight, Zhongxian's vision went dark, and he nearly fainted on the spot. If he'd known that he was going to be assessed by such an artifact, he would never have read so many books. In that 2 hours, the other competitors might have only read a few hundred to more than 1,000 books, but he, by browsing through the books using his soul, had managed to read around 200,000 books. He thought that the test would involve a few questions testing him on the content of the books, and he could easily keep a low profile. Who knew that everything would spiral out of his control so quickly? How was he supposed to keep a low profile like that? There was no way he could make an artifact created by an 8-star master teacher lie for him. What was he supposed to do now? While Zhongxian was conflicted, Hongsha stroked his beard and asked the crowd, "All right, let's begin the test. Who wants to go first?" Everyone glanced at one another, and after a moment of hesitation, everyone's eyes suddenly turned to look at Zhongxian in unison. "Why don't we allow Zhongshe to go first again?" "Indeed. Zhongshe, feel free to go first. We're in no hurry at all." A few of them urged Zhongxian forward. But before Zhongxian could reply, Hongshe, upon seeing the sight, staggered and nearly spewed blood. "Of course none of you will be in a hurry. All of you are just hoping that Zhongshe will cause some kind of trouble once more so that you can pass the test easily. This might be good news to you. But how am I to account this matter to the Master Teacher Pavilion if such a farce were to occur once more?" With a reddened face, Hongsha immediately raised his hands and instructed, "All right, since no one has stepped forward, let's go by age once more. But this time, we'll start from the oldest." It wasn't that Hongsha wanted to discriminate against Zhongshe, but this fellow was simply too fearsome. If he were to allow him to go up first, who knew what would happen to this Book of Emptied River? At the very least, the ghost domain illusory city and otherworldly demon belonged to him, so he could still bear the burden of them breaking. However, the Book of Emptied River was borrowed from the headquarters, and it had to be returned after the test. "I'm going last." Not expecting even a 5-star master teacher to be so scared of him, Zhongxian shook his head, not knowing whether he should laugh or cry. In any case, going first or last made no difference to him. All that mattered at the moment was for him to pass the test, so he didn't pay too much heed to the matter. Besides, he didn't have the effort to be thinking about it either. The most urgent matter at hand was to figure out how he could hide the knowledge which he had just learned. Hearing the decision made by Hongshe, Pavilion Master Kang and the others were also dumbstruck. Zhongshe, to be able to instill such fear into the host of the Master Teacher Tournament, sure is talented. Now that the rules had been established, the rest was simple. The first participant to head up was the oldest Master Teacher of the Group A Master Teacher from Mingxia Empire. This Master Teacher was also among the top 10 of the list of contenders to look out for, and his cultivation had reached clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle. Upon hearing that he was to be up first, he started walking toward the Book of Emptied River. Everyone's eyes gathered on him. Taking a deep breath, the Master Teacher placed his hand on the book momentarily before withdrawing it. The snowy white book shook for an instant before a clear crisp sounded, and a red light shone. Red light, he has passed the test. Wonderful. To be able to weigh one's knowledge, this artifact really is amazing. Seeing the Book of Emptied River in operation left everyone excited. In their view, Artifacts were mainly used in battle or to raise one cultivation. This was their first time seeing an artifact capable of testing one's knowledge. Hongsha nodded his head in commendation as he asked, "How many books did you read?" Reporting to Hongsha, "I've read a total of 1,238 books," the master teacher replied. Not bad. Hongsha complimented before announcing the result. Mingxia Empire's Liu Quan has passed the test. Next, Hengsha Empire's Zhong Mingji. Hearing his name being called, a young man stepped forward. Zhong Mingji. Even though he was the second oldest among all of the master teachers gathered here, his cultivation was only at Transcendent Mortal 4 Dan primary stage, and he was ranked at the lower end of the group. Walking to the Book of Emptied River, he placed his river on it. But different from before, the Book of Emptied River didn't react at all. It was as if his hands had never touched it. It seems like he failed to read 800 books. After waiting a moment later and confirming that there was no reaction from the Book of Emptied River, everyone shook their heads. "I have only read 771 books, Zhong Mingji explained with a bitter smile. He thought that since he was just a little off from reaching 800, he might be able to smoke his way through. But from the looks of it now, it was impossible to fool the Book of Emptied River. Hongsha nodded. Zhong Mingji has failed the test and he'll be eliminated from the tournament. Next. After the first two participants, everyone got a better understanding of the mystical effects of the Book of Emptied River. Following which, based on their age, the master teachers tested the number of books they have read one by one. 2 hours later, all 53 participants, with the exception of Zhong Xian, had been tested. This wisdom test wasn't as simple as it seemed. In total, 17 people were eliminated, and after some questioning, all of them had failed to memorize 800 books. In fact, there was one who memorized 799 books, but the Book of Emptied River still deemed him to have failed, and he could only leave in disappointment. The results of the Book of Emptied River sure are accurate. Seeing how the Book of Emptied River could gauge the difference of even a single book, the crowd couldn't help but be impressed by its accuracy. As expected of a treasure from the headquarters, it was indeed fearsome. Of the 35 people who had passed the test, the one with the best result at the moment wasn't Luo Xian nor Liao Wuji. Surprisingly, it was one of Zhong Xian's acquaintance, Song Chao. During his test, the Book of Emptied River actually emanated an orange glow. This meant that he had memorized a total of 1,600 books. To be able to memorize so many books in just 2 hours, his memorization ability was nothing short of monstrous. Even Zhong Xian was surprised by his results. Even though that fellow looked a little slow on the surface, he didn't expect him to have such a good memory. Ruo Huangong's result of 1,200 or so books was also amongst the forefront. Last but not least, Zhongshe. Following Hongsha's declaration, everyone turned their eyes to the troublemaking young man. Zhongshe is about to be assessed. I'm really curious to see what his results will be. I don't think he'll fare too well in this test. I took a look at him during the test just now, and all he did over the course of the test was take out a book and go into a daze. Under such circumstances, it will be difficult for him to achieve good result. I think so too, but no matter what, this is Zhongshe. Given his astounding results in the previous 2 tests, I find it hard to believe that he will be eliminated in this round. Let's wait and see then. After the previous 2 tests, Zhong Xian had already become the center of attention. Everyone was curious to see how the fellow who smashed the previous 2 tests would fare in this one. Seeing that he couldn't hide any further, Zhong Xian walked forward with a depressed look. He had been racking his brain over this problem throughout the entire duration, but he still couldn't find a feasible solution to it. Forget it. I'll just have to get it done with. Knowing that it was impossible for him to avoid it, Zhong Xian could only muster his courage and step forward. He placed his hand on the Book of Emptied River and retracted it quickly. Then, he stared at the book, curious to see what color it would glow. Chapter 584, Spiritual Perception Book Reading Technique. Under Zhong Xian's stare, the Book of Emptied River remained motionless, as though nothing had been done at all. Why isn't it moving at all? Could it be that he failed the test? It can't be. That would truly be disastrous. But given how formidable Zhongshe is, how could he possibly be unable to memorize 800 books? After waiting a moment longer, seeing the Book of Emptied River remaining motionless, everyone was taken aback. There was no reaction on the part of the Book of Emptied River. It could only mean that the number of books Zhongshe read was less than 800. And if he didn't meet this mark, it means that he would be eliminated. No matter how astounding his results were for the previous rounds, he would be disqualified from this tournament. How could this be? This is such a huge pity. I thought that given how formidable Zhongshe is, he would surely be able to get into the top 10. To think that he would fall here. It's indeed surprising how he failed to memorize 800 books. He should have known he would have ended up like that when he went into a daze. A commotion broke out amidst the crowd. There were some who expressed their pity while there were some who gloated over the matter as well. The outstanding performance of this Zhongshe in the previous 2 rounds had convinced others of his capability, and many saw him as the dark horse of the tournament. Never in their dreams did they expect him to be eliminated in such a manner. This Pavilion Master Kang, Su Shi, and the others felt as though their heads were bursting apart. They were on the verge of tears at this point. They were still worried that Zhongshe would cause some kind of trouble, but in the end, it turned out that he didn't pass the test at all. This meant that all of the hopes they had pinned on him had been crushed. Pavilion Master Kang had an awful expression on his face for a long moment before he managed to recover. Sighing, he shook his head and said, "In the end, it seems like Zhongshe is still much too young. Even though he was talented and had a formidable teacher, he was still unable to stand his ground on such formal occasions." Sighing, a dejected look surfaced on Pavilion Master Kang's face. He seemed as though he had aged by a decade in an instant. He had devoted significant effort into this tournament, and he thought that with Zhongshen's appearance, the long trend behind Myriad Kingdom Alliance's poor performance in the Master-Teacher tournament could be broken, but in the end, his hopes had fallen empty, just like many times before. On the other hand, Zhongshe trembled, and a frenzied look appeared on his face. Who was the young man before him? Zhongshe's student. Even though the latter had put him in a very awkward position in the previous 2 rounds, he still thought that this was to be expected. After all, how could a direct disciple of an 8-star master teacher be someone ordinary? And yet, the other party ended up being eliminated. The main goal of Pavilion Master Mo in leaving behind a high-tier spirit stone was to motivate Zhongshe as well as to win a favor from him. And yet, the latter actually failed in the preliminary selection. How was he going to survive as a master teacher now that he had gotten on the bad side of the Pavilion Master of the headquarters? Not to mention, there was an 8-star master teacher standing behind Zhongshe. He could feel tears welling up in his eyes, threatening to spill at any moment. Zhongshe passing the test was awful enough, but him not passing the test was even worse. He must be the first host of the Master Teacher tournament to land in such a state. But even so, since the result was out, he couldn't change his words. Otherwise, the preliminary selection would lose its meaning, and his integrity as the host would be questioned. Thus, he could only muster his courage and announce, since the Book of Emptied River didn't glow, it means that Zhongshe didn't pass the test. Alright, let's move on to the last test. Halfway through his announcement, he suddenly noticed the shocked widened eyes of the crowd below, as if they had seen a ghost. What's wrong? Perplexed, Zhongshe turned around and looked, and in an instant, he was dumbfounded as well. Unknowingly, the Book of Emptied River was already floating in the air, and its entire body was glowing a bright shade of red. Just when Zhongshe was contemplating the reason behind the difference in the shade of red, the color of the glow changed orange. And after which, orange, green, blue, indigo, and violet. In an instant, it was as if someone had opened up a rainbow kaleidoscope, or the most brilliant and beautiful firework had exploded. Bright colors filled the entire surroundings. 7 colors. Zhongshe was stunned. He had seen before someone inducing a red glow, an orange glow, a yellow glow, a green glow, but 7 interchanging colors, what the heck? Could it be that the Book of Emptied River had suddenly got high on something, so it decided to show a few colors to celebrate? Or did it suffer a stroke and malfunction? But such a matter had never happened before. Suddenly, someone amidst the crowd exclaimed, Could it be that the Book of Emptied River had just finished analyzing Zhongsha's knowledge, and it's reflecting his results now? To take so long to analyze. Is that even possible? For it to take so long, how many books must he have read? Hearing those words, a huge commotion broke out. If this matter had happened to someone else, they would have surely just attributed it to the book malfunctioning. But since the person in question was Zhongsha, they couldn't exclude any possibility. Given how this fellow was able to tear down the ghost domain illusory city and convince an otherworldly demon to commit suicide, it wouldn't be unimaginable for him to turn the Book of Emptied River into a firework simulator. Catcher. While the crowd was in the midst of their discussion, a crisp sound suddenly echoed. The Book of Emptied River, after flickering for innumerable times, suddenly swayed. A crack slowly crept across it, and it fell from the sky, torn into two halves. Ah! Seeing the precious Book of Emptied River being torn apart, everyone was shocked for a moment before realization struck them. There's no doubt about it now, it is true. Yes, Zhongsha must be the culprit behind it. Otherwise, how could it possibly have broken all of the sudden? If they were still hesitant as to the reason why the Book of Emptied River was going bonkers all of the sudden, upon seeing it torn into two, they were confident that it was Zhongsha's doing. Given the many precedents that fellow had set, who else could it be? Hongsha sure was pitiful. Breaking an object borrowed from the headquarters, he would surely be punished severely. Thinking so, everyone turned to look at the elder on the stage with a sympathetic look. They were just about to utter words of consolation when what they saw made their eyes widen further. Upon seeing the torn Book of Emptied River, not only did Hongsha seem in the least panicked or sorrowful, excitement was even gleaming in his eyes. His face flushed a deep shade of red out of excitement, and if not for the etiquette he had cultivated over the years, he might have leaped up in exhilaration. What was going on? Didn't you borrow this artifact from the headquarters? Since it has been destroyed, shouldn't you be distressed? Then why are you trembling uncontrollably in agitation as though you have eaten an aphrodisiac? What happened to Hongsha? In the previous two stages, when Zhongsha destroyed his possessions, he had a clear look of displeasure on his face. Why would he look so excited this time round? Zhao Feiwu was perplexed. Most probably. Pavilion Master Kang contemplated for a long period of time before continuing. He has just gotten used to it. Gotten used to it. The excited Hongsha staggered upon hearing those words. How open of a heart must he have to get used to having his prized possessions being shattered? Naturally, the reason why he was happy wasn't because he had gotten used to having his items being destroyed but that Zhongsha wasn't eliminated. The Book of Emptied River might be precious, but compared to getting on the bad side of Pavilion Master Mo and Yang Shu, it was nothing at all. It was clear which was the lesser of the two evils. Given that Zhongsha had passed the test, naturally, this was something for him to celebrate. But still, he was probably the only host in the history of master-teacher tournaments to be delighted over having his own possession destroyed. Red light means one has memorized 800 books, orange light means one has memorized 1600 books, so on and so forth. Given that all of the lights have flickered continuously. Zhongsha, exactly how many books have you memorized in the past 2 hours? Recovering from his negative emotions, Hongsha turned to look at the youngster with doubt in his eyes. Given that memorizing 5,600 books would induce a violet light, and that fellow had induced the violet light to appear as though a firework, even causing the inferior tier Book of Emptied River to break into two from being overloaded. How many books must he have read for such a situation to occur? Thinking of the same thing, curious, the others also turned their gazes to him. How many books? Zhongxian rubbed his glabella. The matter which he had been troubled over really came to be. He had been worried about this matter for the entire period of time, but what had to happen would eventually still have to happen. If he were to tell the truth and say that he had memorized more than 200,000 books while the others were struggling to memorize 1,000, would Hongsha die of fright on the spot? Cough cough, I wasn't counting. I think it should be around 10 to 20,000 books. Awkward, Zhongxian decided to divide the figure by 10. 10 to 20,000 books. But still, the astonishing amount was still sufficient to shock everyone present here. While others were still reading 700 to 800 books, You had read more than 10 times of what they did. Are you sure you are still a human? A master teacher among the crowd exclaimed, that can't be. There is only a total of 5,000 books on the shelves, and I've been looking at you throughout the examination. You have been dazing off, and you didn't flip through those books either. How could you have memorized the contents of so many books? This fellow had been dazing off like a fool right from the start. He had been holding the same book from the start to the end, so how could he possibly memorize the contents of all of the books on the shelf? Not to mention, there was only a total of 5,000 books up there. How in the world did you read 10 to 20,000 books? Scratching his head, Zhong Xian was at a loss. But still, this was not the first time he had stumbled by such a situation, so he was able to recover quickly. Coughing lightly, he explained, this concerns a unique book-reading technique that my teacher imparted me. Even without flipping through the books, I can still read through them. As for the additional books, after I was done with the books on the shelf, I realized that I still had some additional time, so I went on to read the books I keep in my storage ring as well. Knowing that it was impossible for him to explain this matter, he decided to push this matter to the mysterious teacher of his. In any case, given that he had such a huge backing, there was no need for him to worry at all. To read through books without flipping through it. Everyone was confused. The words were contained within the book. How could one read a book without flipping through it? Does he have the ability to peer through material objects? Does such a technique really exist in the world? But why haven't I heard of it then? While everyone was skeptical of Zhong Xian's words, Hongsha's body suddenly trembled, his face paled, and he muttered with a slightly hoarse voice, Could it be? But how is that possible? Hongsha, could it be that you've heard of such a technique before? A master teacher couldn't help but ask upon seeing the other party's reaction. Everyone also turned their gazes over. As a 5-star master teacher and a transcendent mortal 6-dan expert, Hongsha was indubitably the most knowledgeable of them here, be it cultivation or worldly experience. Indeed, I happen to have heard of such a matter before. Hearing the question, Hongsha recovered from his shock. He glanced at Zhong Xian and thought of a certain person, and a look of respect gradually surfaced. I had the privilege of listening to Hongyuan Empire's Pavilion Master Mo's lesson once, and he mentioned such a matter before. If my conjecture is right, it should be a technique that only a Saint 2-dan expert is capable of. Spiritual Perception Book Reading Technique. Chapter 585, Celestial Chess Spiritual Perception Book Reading Technique. Saint 2-dan? All of the master teachers below stared at one another in confusion. They had never heard of such a term before. Instead of answering the question straight away, Hongsha said, Beyond Fighter is Transcendent Mortal, followed by Half-Saint, Nascent Saint, and finally, Saint. I believe you all should be aware of these cultivation realms. UN. The crowd nodded their heads. Most of those present were all master teachers. Even though Saint was still very far off from them, perhaps even out of reach, they had at least heard of it. Half-Saint and Nascent Saint are just intermediary stages, while Saint, just like Transcendent Mortal and Fighter, consists of 9 dans. Hongsha continued. Half-Saint and Nascent Saint are just 2 normal realms, just like Origin Energy Realm and Yin-Yang Realm. On the other hand, Saint was the name for the entire set of cultivation realms. Just like Fighter and Transcendent Mortal, it could be divided to 9 tiers. The first dan is known as Void Pursuit Realm. At this realm, one will be capable of flight. As for the second dan, it is known as Spiritual Perception Realm. With a grave look on his face, Hongsha said, only at this level can one open their incipient eye and awaken their spiritual perception. Someone couldn't help but ask, spiritual perception. What's that? He had heard of the concept of souls, but he had never heard of spiritual perception before. Hongsha explained, spiritual perception is a unique capability that only saints possess. As we know, upon reaching consonant spirit realm, one's soul becomes aligned with one's body, thus allowing one to temper one's soul and strengthen it. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. Transcendent Mortal 5-dan consonant spirit realm opened up a whole new world to cultivators. At this level, not only would a cultivator be able to train their physical body and zhenqi, they would be able to train their souls too. A strong soul can achieve unimaginable feats. You will understand this upon reaching that realm. Once one's soul reaches a certain level, one becomes able to extend the reach of their soul and perceive everything that it touches. In fact, one's sight would even be clearer than what our eyes are capable of. This is what spiritual perception is, Hongsha said. Extending the reach of one's soul? For a soul to be able to extend beyond one's body to conduct observation, how powerful must one be? It can't be, is Hongsha saying. Zhongsha already possesses the strength of a Saint Tu Dan? Everyone leapt in shock. Saint Tu Dan? How was that possible? Zhongxian was also perplexed by the situation unfolding around him. All he had spouted was nonsense. How did Hongsha draw the line to the saint realm? Hongsha shook his head. Naturally, Zhongsha can't possibly be a saint. There's no need to worry, allow me to finish my explanation first. You'll understand it after I'm done. Reading via spiritual perception is much more convenient and efficient than reading manually. This is also the reason why saints accrue knowledge swiftly, and they grow at an astounding pace. While Zhongsha isn't a saint, he seems to possess an ability equivalent to this as well. If I'm not mistaken, an expert must have dug out the incipient eye of a Saint Tu Dan and transplanted it to him using some unique method, thus allowing him to read and memorize content swiftly. Even though Hongsha was the one raising the conjecture, he still couldn't help but feel shocked by the matter. Only a saint who had opened his incipient eye could awaken his spiritual perception. Theoretically speaking, if an incipient eye was dug out and transplanted onto another person, as long as it was done properly, that person should be able to awaken his spiritual perception as well. But of course, due to the lacking cultivation, that person wouldn't be able to utilize the spiritual perception properly. At most, he would only be able to use it on reading books. But even so, for a low-tier master teacher, its significance was immense. To be able to read 10 books in the time it took for others to finish reading one, it was just a matter of time before one surpassed all of one's peers. It was no wonder Zhongsha was able to be adept in so many occupations despite his young age. It had to be the working of this ability of his. Most probably, Yangsha had prepared this specially for him just for this. To dig out a Saint Tu Dan's incipient eye and transplant it on another perfectly. How powerful must Yangsha be? Just the thought of it sent shivers down his spine. It was no wonder Pavilion Master Mo feared the other party so much, going to the extent of even using a high-tier spirit stone to please the other party. An expert of such caliber was indeed qualified to be fawned upon by him. To transplant the incipient eye of a Saint Tu Dan on someone else? To be able to read swiftly even without flipping pages? Not to mention, to be able to read books in the storage ring as well? It is no wonder you could read so many books within 2 hours. But still, to be able to memorize all of these, isn't your memory a little way too good? Indeed. Just browsing through a book doesn't mean that one has necessarily memorized it. What is truly fearsome is for one to read swiftly while assimilating its content. Hearing Hongsha's explanation, everyone came to a realization. They turned to look at the young man before them with a look of fright. To be able to dig out the incipient eye of a Saint Tu Dan, what kind of terrifying background does this fellow have? Amidst everyone's shock, Ruo Huangong's eyelids were twitching violently. Depression loomed over his head. It was just a moment ago that he asked Zhongsha how many books he had read, and the latter replied that he had read the same number of books as him. This had left Ruo Huangongzi happy for quite a while. He thought that he had finally found something that he was on par on with that monster, but in the end, how in the world can your 20,000 books be around the same as my 1,000 books? Even if you wish to console me, please do it with some sincerity. Interrupting into the noise, Hongsha said, all right, regardless of how it is, given that Zhongsha has memorized the contents of more than 20,000 books, as can be proven by the shattering of the Book of Emptied River, I hereby announce that he has cleared the test. Is there anyone with any objections? None at all. The crowd hurriedly shook their heads. You must be jesting. The other party read 20,000 books and even crippled the Book of Emptied River. Even if we were to have objections, would you listen to them? Yuan, since that's the case, Let's move on to the last test of our preliminary selection intelligence. Hongsha turned to look at the remaining participants. Even with the support of a teacher, the path of cultivation is ultimately individual. Other than hard work and talent, more importantly, one has to possess superior intelligence. Even when studying the same cultivation technique or battle technique, different students will interpret it differently, and thus, the extent of benefit they could derive from it would differ as well. One can easily become a master teacher with talent, but to wish to become a capable master teacher relying solely on that, I can tell you it's nigh impossible. As such, intelligence is crucial to walking further as a master teacher. Intelligence is indeed important to a master teacher. But how can one test their intelligence? Will they be given a cultivation technique to analyze? But analyzing a cultivation technique would make the test biased toward some. Everyone would have differing levels of compatibility with a specific cultivation technique, and besides, talent and wisdom also counts in it as well. It doesn't seem possible to isolate intelligence and test it as itself. The crowd was puzzled. Intelligence is of utmost importance to a master teacher. Everyone present here could make the association. However, such a quality couldn't be quantified easily, and given such, how could comparisons be made? Even if you can measure wisdom through weighing knowledge, how can you measure intelligence? Even when attempting to comprehend a cultivation technique, a person with lower intelligence would surely find it easier to comprehend a technique aligned with his constitution as compared to a person whose constitution is incompatible with the technique. Hihi, I understand your concerns, and I've thought a lot about this issue as well. Noticing everyone's worry, Hongsha chuckled, and with a wave of his hand, the fog veiling another corner of the round stage scattered, revealing a seemingly ordinary gazebo. Seated in the gazebo was a white-robed old man, and a grey chessboard was placed on a stone table in front of him. Black and white stones intersected one another atop the chessboard, as though yin and yang assailing one another, a chess formation. The old man had an impassive face, and there wasn't the slightest vitality that could be felt from him. With a look, it was clear that he was a puppet. This is celestial chess. Its rules are completely different from all other chess games existent in the world, thus forming its own school. Back then, when I was touring around the world, I chanced upon it in some ruins. I don't know who created it, and there weren't any explanations regarding the rules either. Intrigued, I spent many years attempting to decipher it, but even so, I only managed to comprehend around 40 to 50% of it. Waving his hand once more, a wall not too far away from the gazebo shimmered, and an image of the layout of the chess in the gazebo was projected on it. It was entirely foreign to everyone present here. Even those who had immersed themselves in chess in the past were unable to draw on their experiences to decipher this. A chess formation? It seems so. But given that no one knows the rules, how will the participants be assessed? I've no idea as well. There were many among the crowd who were learned in the way of chess, but seeing the profound formation projected on the wall, they realized it was entirely different from what they had learned before, and this left them dumbfounded. In celestial chess, the heavens and earth are the chessboard, and the stars are the stones. It is intricately aligned with the essence of the world. One won't be able to comprehend anything by seeing the formation on the wall, but on the pillars in the gazebo, there are some words left behind by the previous owner of the chessboard. Through these words, one is able to decipher the rules of the game. After deciphering the rules, one can challenge the puppet in the gazebo. If one were to make an invalid or a losing move, one will find himself incapable of placing the stone down on the board. This test has nothing to do with talent, cultivation, or anything at all. It is purely a match of intelligence. Those with higher intelligence will be able to decipher more of the rules and make more moves, whereas those with lower intelligence will have limited comprehension of the rules and find the number of moves they can make limited as well. To pass this test, you'll have to make at least 6 valid moves, Hongsha explained. To actually use chess to gauge one's intelligence, amazing, the heaven and earth as the chessboard, and the stars as the stones, how domineering. Through this chess, one would indeed be able to isolate intelligence from other external factors. It is truly a fair test. Hearing the rules, everyone nodded their heads in agreement. The way of chess was highly demanding on one's intelligence. Some who devoted decades to the game might find themselves outmatched by a child who had barely learned it for a few days, albeit rarely. This didn't necessarily mean that the child was more knowledgeable than the adult, just more intelligent. As such, there was a saying among top chess players, chances are null if one fails to reach the top by 20. Without sufficient intelligence and talent, it would be nigh impossible for one to reach the top. It's cruel, but such is the world. Given that this celestial chess operated by entirely different rules compared to all other games in the master-teacher continent, and one was to compete with the puppet through deciphering the limited words written on the pillars, it was indeed the best way to quantify one's intelligence. As expected of a 5-star master-teacher, his means were indeed exceptional. All master teachers who enter the gazebo will only be given an incense's time to read and decipher the words on the pillars before starting the match with the puppet. If one exceeds the timing or is unable to put down his piece, that would be the end of the test. Hongsha waved his hands and said, "All right, now that I've finished explaining the rules, let's begin the test." Yes. The participants nodded their heads. Since there is only one chessboard, we can only go one by one. Thus, let's decide the sequence. Hongsha glanced at the crowd. In the first test, Zhongxian was the first to take the test, and he destroyed the ghost domain illusory city, thus no one was eliminated. In the second test, due to the otherworldly demon committing suicide halfway through the test, only the 3 men who fled in the midst were eliminated. And in the third test, 17 people were eliminated. After the 3 tests, of the 56 initial participants, only 20 were eliminated, leaving behind a hulking 36. "Why don't I go first?" Zhongxian stepped forward. Given that there were 36 people in total and given that just the preparation time in itself was 1 incense's time, by the time everyone was done, the sun would have already set. Since that was the case, he might as well quickly get it over and done with so that he could rest. Cough cough. Seeing Zhongxian walk over, Hongsha nearly choked on his saliva. "You don't even try. I am not so courageous as to let you go first after you wrecked the previous 3 tests." Chapter 586, Failure? Knowing what the other party was worried about, Zhongxian said, "It's just a chess game. I don't think it's possible for me to destroy the chessboard. Everything before was just carelessness. Now that he knew the rules, he would surely make sure to take precautions and make only 6 moves. As long as he were to show some restraint, it would be impossible for anything awry like in the previous few tests to happen." Ignoring Zhongxian, Hongsha waved his hands and spoke affirmatively. "Why don't we go by age once more? We'll start from the oldest. I also thought that nothing would go awry in the previous tests. After all, it was just a test on reading books. Who could have imagined that the Book of Emptied River which I borrowed from the headquarter would be destroyed? Just think about how much damage you have caused since the tournament started. And you still want to go first? Dream on. All right then." Seeing how even a 5-star master teacher was scared to such a point, not even giving him a chance to explain himself, Zhongxian shrugged helplessly. It seemed like he could only bide his time here and wait for the others to be done. It is fortunate that Hongsha stood his ground. Otherwise, who knows what would happen this time round. Pavilion Master Kang and the others also wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads upon seeing the scene. When Zhongxian offered to go first, all of them also leaped in shock. While it seemed implausible for anything to happen in a chess game, the person in question was Zhongxian. Given his unconventional way of doing things, there was no way they could be certain. In any case, the safest bet was to put him at the very last. While they were deciding on the rules, among the participants, Liu Quan of Mingxia Empire's eyelids were twitching uncontrollably. He just happened to be the oldest among the group. Who in the world did he offend for him to have to go first each time? It was not like he did anything wrong, he was just the oldest among all of the participants here. Was there really a need for him to go first consecutively? But in any case, being the first or the last was unlikely to make any difference in this test anyway. It was just a difference in the mental state. Taking a deep breath, he drove his soul depth and activated the heart of tranquil water. After which, clasping his fist toward Hongsha, he proceeded over to the gazebo. The others also quickly turned their sights over. Liu Quan walked to the 4 pillars propping from the gazebo one by one, and after which, he fell into deep contemplation. It didn't take too long for an incense's time to be up. With a frown, he walked to the opposite end of the chessboard form the puppet, picked up a stone, and lightly placed it down on an empty spot. Voila! The stone floated in the air for a moment before slowly falling down onto the chessboard. He managed to place it. It seems like he has made a right move. Seeing that the stone had been successfully placed down, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Hongsha had said previously, the stone couldn't be placed if the move was an invalid or losing move. Who? The old man opposite of him also put down a stone. Seeing the move the old man made, seemingly put in a difficult position, a deep frown appeared on Liu Quan's forehead. But his dilemma didn't continue for too long. Soon, he placed down another stone as well. Just like that, they quickly exceeded the minimum requirement of 6 stones to pass the test, and soon, they reached their 9th stone. But on the 10th, Liu Quan found himself unable to push his stone down anymore. Mingxiao Empire's Liu Quan passes with 9 stones. Next. Fenglai Empire's Han Zhaoji. Hongsha announced. Han Zhaoji walked up onto the stage. Not too long later, he left the gazebo with an excited expression on his face. He had passed the test with a score of 7 stones. Following which, the next candidate went up. After 5 consecutive successful challenges, the remaining participants felt much more confident. But at this point, the streak was broken. The 6th challenger found himself unable to put down the 4th stone, and the next 4 challengers that went after him failed the test as well. Eventually, it was Luo Xian who broke that losing streak. At this point, everyone realized that the formation on the chessboard would change for each participant, and thus, everyone would be unable to emulate the moves of those who had gone before them. This ensured the equality of the test. Time passed, and the sky soon darkened. Just like what Zhongxian guessed, by the time the 35 master teachers were done, a full moon was already hanging in the sky. Even though those who came for the tournament were all geniuses, many still fell in this test. While the number of eliminated participants wasn't as exaggerated as in the previous test, a total of 9 people still failed. However, most of Zhongxian's acquaintances, such as Ruo Huangongzi and Song Chao, still managed to pass the test. Surprisingly, the one holding the current record wasn't a participant from the strongest Fleeting Cloud sect or the second strongest White Alios sect. Rather, he came from an empire that was of similar standing to the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. The cultivation of this master teacher could be considered to be near the lowest among the participants, but his intelligence seemed to be exceptional. Against the puppet, he managed to hold on for 16 steps, and the impressed old man puppet even said, "Good. Zhongsha, it's your turn." After everyone was done, Hongsha turned his gaze to the bored Zhongxian with a slightly apologetic look. The latter wished to go first, but due to his own fear, he forced the latter to the back instead. UN. Zhongxian stretched his back before walking over to the gazebo. The gazebo wasn't too big, around an average person's height. The first thing he saw upon entering was that the closest pillar to him had the 4 words East, South, West, and North on them. These 4 words didn't possess any artistic conception belonging to a painter behind it, they were just ordinary words. Turning his sight to the second pillar, there were words on them as well. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. As for the next pillar, there were only 2 words. To and fro. And for the 4th pillar, there was only a single word. Reason. North, south, east, west, spring, summer, autumn, winter, to fro, and reason? This. What the heck are these? Zhongxian frowned. He thought that there would be more detailed hints, but they were just normal words. 4 pillars of 11 words, but there were no links among them whatsoever, and none of them had anything to do with chess either. What was he supposed to decipher? After looking at each of the pillars, he turned his attention to the chessboard. The chessboard looked much more chaotic than before. With just a single glance, Zhongxian was plunged into confusion. Celestial chess, heaven and earth as the chessboard, and stars as the stones. Frowning, Zhongxian recalled what Hongsha said, and a thought struck him. North, south, east, west refers to space, spring, summer, autumn, winter refers to time, To fro refers to position, and reason refers to the heart. Space, time, position, and heart. All the knowledge that Zhongxian learned previously flowed through his head, and the light in Zhongxian's eyes slowly intensified. It was no wonder why Hongshe was intrigued by it. The name of the celestial chess wasn't just show. It was indeed emulating the heavens and earth as the chessboard. It built on a person's heart to construct a vast world and used it as the chessboard. It was indeed a formidable game. I wonder how far I can go based solely on my comprehension and intelligence. Upon understanding the rules behind the celestial chess, Zhongxian chuckled lightly. He had depended heavily on the library of Heaven's Path and Eye of Insight on his previous stages. Given how simple the current stage was, he was curious to see how far he could go on his capabilities. Turning around, Zhongxian walked over to the opposite of the stone table and sat down. Studying it for a moment, he decided on a position, grabbed a stone, and decisively placed it down. Do you think that Zhongshe will break the celestial chess? That should be impossible, it's just a chess game. Besides, one will be unable to put his stone down if one makes a wrong move. It is indeed unlikely for anything to happen to the celestial chess. But I still think that it won't end that simply. Why don't we bet on it then? What do you want to bet on? I bet that Zhongshe will destroy the celestial chess. If I win, you will hand over your silk fan to me. Otherwise, I'll give you the emerald pearl which you have been eyeing. Deal. As soon as Zhongxian walked into the gazebo, discussions immediately broke out among the crowd. There were even a few who betted on it. Cough cough. Hearing the excited bets in the surrounding, Zhao Feiwu, Pavilion Master Kang, and the others slapped their foreheads in embarrassment, fearing that others would know that they were acquainted with Zhongshe. To think that a participant of the Master-Teacher tournament would actually be regarded as the god of destruction. It will be the dueling round right after this test. Even though we still don't know the rules behind it, if Zhongshe and Ruohuan Gongzi were to both proceed on to the next round, this would be the best results that our Myriad Kingdom Alliance has ever achieved over the years. Lingsha analyzed and said. Indeed. Pavilion Master Kang nodded his head. There were only 27 people left in the tournament. There were 7 powers whose 2 participants were already eliminated. In other words, even if Zhongshe and Ruohuan Gongzi were to fail terribly in the dueling round, the results would still be much better than what the Myriad Kingdom Alliance had ever achieved in the previous tournaments. It was fortunate that Ruohuan Gongzi had managed to reach Transcendent Mortal 4-Dan Pinnacle under Zhongshe's help, and his experience with Zhongshe had helped temper his soft qualities such as courage. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for him to pass those tests. In other words, Zhongshe had played a pivotal role in the current outstanding results of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. Just as they were thinking about this matter, Su Shi suddenly exclaimed, "Look! Zhongshe is making a move." Everyone quickly lifted their gazes and saw Zhongxian seated right before a puppet. He placed a stone down onto the board. In that moment, everyone waited with bated breaths. Fortunately, the stone went down. After which, the old man opposite to him picked up a stone as well, but at that moment, he suddenly froze, as though he had no intentions of playing the stone at all. What's going on? It can't be that. Zhongshe is intending to destroy the puppet instead of the celestial chess? Upon seeing the old man's frozen body, everyone stared at one another in bewilderment. They were just contemplating whether the celestial chess would be destroyed by Zhongshe, and the latter, with a single step, caused the movements of the puppet to freeze. It couldn't be that it was really broken. Wasn't that a little, way too exaggerated? Everyone turned to look at Hongshe, and the latter had a deep frown on his forehead as well. After a short moment later, Hongshe couldn't stand the tension anymore. He walked over to the gazebo and looked at the puppet. And a moment later, he heaved a sigh of relief. Just like the others, he thought that the puppet might have malfunctioned. But after taking a closer look, the puppet was still operating perfectly. Please make your move. Standing beside the puppet, Hongshe bowed. Even though the old man was a puppet, it possessed spirit and it was capable of interpreting human speech. The both of them had often played against one another, and Hongshe possessed deep respect for him. After a moment of hesitation, The puppet nodded and placed his stone down. Zhong Xian was stunned for an instant, but he soon picked up a second stone and placed it down. Wang. But the chess simply floated in midair, refusing to go down no matter how much force Zhong Xian put into pushing it down. He can't place the stone? Does this mean that his move is invalid? So he failed? Everyone was taken aback. Even Hong Shi was in disbelief. Based on the rules, one would only be considered to have passed the test after making 6 moves, and currently, Zhong Shi had only made a single move. Did this mean that he had failed the test? Shit. Does this mean that there's a mistake in my comprehension? Gedung. Zhong Xian's heart skipped a beat. He used neither the Library of Heaven's Path nor the Eye of Insight this time. Was he really going to fail just like that? Chapter 587. Dueling round begins. All along, regardless of what it was, he had always used the Library of Heaven's Path and Eye of Insight to interpret and understand profound topics. But this time, he had decided to test out his own intelligence by playing with the rules he interpreted from the words inscribed on the pillars. He thought that he would at least be able to get 6 pieces down, yet he found himself stuck on the second stone. Could he have really screwed up this time? Was his intelligence really that poor? Zhong Xian was on the verge of tears. He had proceeded smoothly in the past 3 tests, he didn't expect to fail here. Hong Shi's face was also twitching violently. To be unable to put down the second stone. How was he supposed to clear up the mess this time? He couldn't possibly say that considerably Zhong Shi's talent, he was an exception and could clear the test just by putting down a single stone. If only he'd known this would happen, he would have surely allowed Zhong Shi to go first. In the end, such a matter happened. If Zhong Shi were to bear a grudge against him over this matter, he would surely be screwed. What the heck was this? For a 5-star master teacher, the host of the master teacher tournament, to have his heart hanging over a mere preliminary selection, he couldn't help but feel intense indignation. Gritting his teeth, Hong Shi mustered his courage and announced, since Zhong Shi was unable to put down the second stone, this means that he has failed the test. Alright, since the preliminary selection is over, let's move on to the dueling round. But at that moment, the puppet opposite to Zhong Xian suddenly pushed the chessboard aside and stood up. A clear voice reverberated in the air. I have lost. Lost? What does that mean? Zhong Shi won against the puppet in a match of celestial chess? Not to mention, he even had the other party willingly admit his defeat. Aren't the rules of the celestial chess difficult to comprehend? To actually understand the rules within an incense's time to defeat the puppet. Everyone was taken aback. The impossibility of the situation was driving them insane. They thought the reason why Zhong Shi was unable to put down his second stone was due to his lack of understanding of the rules. Never could they have imagined that the puppet would admit his defeat in the next moment. This wasn't just at the level of understanding the rules or not. Rather, Zhong Shi had become an expert in the game, an existence that others could only look up to. Are you for real? Luo Xian, Song Chao, and the others widened their eyes in disbelief. They had undergone the test personally, and they knew how profound celestial chess was. Those who could put down more than 6 stones could be considered geniuses among geniuses. And yet, the person before them actually defeated the puppet utterly in his second move. Was he still a human? Contrary to everyone's shock, Hong Shi felt immense relief instead. It seemed like every time he was going to announce Zhong Shi's loss, the other party would make a huge turnaround. In that instant, he felt as though he was being toyed with. If this were to go on top of going bankrupt, he would have to worry about his heart malfunctioning due to the excessive shock. While everyone was dumbfounded, shocked, gritting their teeth, convulsing, kicking, rolling. The person in question, Zhong Xian, was also bewildered. He used neither the Library of Heaven's Path nor the Eye of Insight this time, and he was relying solely on his own intelligence to clear this test. As such, he was lacking in confidence. This was precisely the reason why his heart stopped when he found himself unable to put down the second stone and panicked. But never in his dreams could he have imagined that not only would he clear the test, the puppet would even admit defeat on his own accord. Just as he was about to say something, the old man before him bowed, and a voice echoed in his mind. Even though you only made a single move, you sealed all possible paths of advancement and retreat. I'm unable to counter your move at all. Finally, celestial chess has a successor, after which, a surge of information suddenly dived into his head. Hong Long. With this surge of information, countless plausible chess formations and setups became assimilated as part of his knowledge. Soul impartation? Zhong Xian widened his eyes in shock. To be able to allow a puppet to conduct soul impartation, how powerful must the person who created the puppet be? Zhong Xian thought with a grim expression. But before he could take a look at his newfound knowledge, the puppet before him suddenly fell motionless, as though it had lost all strength. Following which, countless cracks started creeping across its body. This is bad. Zhong Xian widened his eyes in alarm. He quickly rushed forward to stop the impending destruction. In the information that was transferred to him, he learned of the meaning behind the existence of the puppet to pass down the heritage of celestial chess. Now that it had accomplished its raison d'etre, the lingering will left within the puppet vanished, resulting in its inability to continue functioning. Naturally, the puppet started to fall apart. Just that. Even if you are going to fall apart, at least do it after I'm done with my test, when no one is around. To fall apart at such a time. How am I supposed to face Hongshe? Placing his arm on the old man, Zhong Xian infused his zhenqi into him in hopes of forcefully keeping him intact. Yet, contrary to his expectations, the zhenqi he infused collided with the other party's zhenqi. Boom! The puppet immediately exploded into dust. And the chessboard and gazebo also seemed to have lost its source of power, and they collapsed, turning into ruins. The heck? Zhong Xian was frenzied. I only did that out of goodwill so as to sustain the puppet for a moment longer. How could I've known that such a thing would occur? But actually, thinking deeper into it, Zhong Xian also realized his error. The puppet was sustained by a lingering will, and most likely, this lingering will was infused into it through the means of a soul oracle. Otherwise, it shouldn't be possible for a lifeless puppet to be capable of soul impartation. And his Heaven's Path zhenqi happened to be the nemesis of soul oracles. What should have been a simple collapse turned into an explosion instead with the interference of his zhenqi. Turning his gaze to the crowd, Zhong Xian saw everyone staring at him with widened eyes, as though looking at a monster. Did you see that? Even the celestial chess wasn't spared. I told you that it would be destroyed, right? And to think that you didn't believe me. How could Zhongshe explode the puppet even after it has admitted defeat? This is too much. You're right. But if he didn't do so, how could he maintain his reputation as the god of destruction? Everyone whispered with hushed voices. They thought that perhaps celestial chess would be an exception, but in the end, just like the artifacts in the previous 3 tests, it was destroyed as well. It seemed as though regardless of how valuable an artifact, it only had one fate upon meeting Zhongshe. Utter destruction. It doesn't matter how sturdy or resilient you are. Hearing those words, Zhong Xian spurted blood. I really didn't do it intentionally, I was really trying to save him. I didn't do any of these voluntarily, it was all just coincidence. He destroyed something yet again. Pavilion Master Kang and the others stared at one another. At this point, there was only one thought in their mind: relief. They couldn't help but feel relieved that they didn't use any valuable artifact in the selection round back then. Otherwise, their master-teacher pavilion would probably be bankrupt by now. My celestial chess. Hongshe's lips trembled in agitation. Only he knew how long it took for him to accrue sufficient wealth to obtain the Ghost Domain Illusory City and the celestial chess, and yet, in a single tournament, they were all destroyed by Zhongshe. In just a single day, he was reduced to a poor bloke. He felt as though a knife was lodged deeply into his chest, leaving his heart bleeding profusely. Even so, he did see what happened to the puppet clearly. The puppet was crumbling even before Zhongshe approached it, and Zhongshe was indeed moving to secure it. It was just that his help only made things worse, and an explosion was induced. But while he knew of this, there was no doubt that the reason behind the crumbling of the puppet was still due to Zhongshe. If only he'd known this would happen, he wouldn't have bothered with a preliminary round. He would have just gone ahead with duels in an elimination format instead. It took a while before Hongshe was able to calm down. Exhaling deeply, he forcefully suppressed his indignation. All he could do now was ask for some compensation from Pavilion Master Mo, and hope that the latter would offer something in exchange for the loss he had incurred. He didn't know how else he could console himself at this point. Hongshe glanced at the crowd and asked, given that the puppet has admitted defeat, it means that Zhongshe has fully comprehended the rules behind the celestial chess. Does anyone have any objections against this ruling? No. Everyone shook their heads. While the fellow standing before the ruins of the celestial chess was indeed a god of destruction, they had to admit that the other party did possess capability that an average person could hardly imagine. Since Zhongshe has completed his challenge, this signifies the end of the preliminary selection. Since it's no longer early, let's waste no time and proceed straight onto the dueling round, Hongshe announced. Since the 4 tests of the preliminary selection was over, it was time to move on to the dueling round. The rules for the dueling round are simple. The duels will be in pairs, and the sequence and matching will be decided by picking lots. The duel need not be a fight, it can also be based on the various core aspects of a master teacher, such as soul depth, knowledge impartation, understanding of cultivation, flaws identification, so on and so forth. The winner moves on to the next round, whereas the loser is eliminated. This will go on until the top 10 is out. Hongshe glanced at the participants and said, "Is there anything you wish to clarify?" No. The participants hurriedly shook their heads. This was the usual format of the dueling round in the Master Teacher Tournament, and the rules were simple as well. Alright, we'll start with picking lots. There are 27 people currently, and 16 people will move on to the next round. In other words, there will be 5 people who will move on to the next round straight without competing, Hongshe said. There is a fixed rule to dueling rounds stating that no matter how many participants there are initially, after the first round, it should be in a power of 2, meaning 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So on and so forth. This was to ensure greater fairness in the subsequent rounds, especially as the fights became more intense later on. Only through this sequencing could it be guaranteed that only 2 people would be competing for the champion spot eventually. Alright, let's begin picking lots. After introducing the rules, Hongshe waved his hand, and a master teacher walked up with a box prepared beforehand. The remaining 27 participants came up one by one to pick a number. Zhongxian was the same as well. After a quick look, he shook his head. It seemed his luck wasn't too good. He hadn't managed to draw the 5 empty slots that allowed for automatic advancement to the next round. I managed to draw the empty slot. Just as Zhongxian was lamenting his misfortune, he saw Ruo Huangongzi looking at him excitedly. Taking a look at the other party's lot, he saw A1, empty written on it. On the other hand, written on Zhongxian's lot was D2. Seeing that everyone was done drawing the lots, Hongshe said, "The dueling round will be divided into 4 main sectors, namely A, B, C, and D, and each sector will be further divided into 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those who draw the same lots will be matched against one another, and those who have the word empty written on their lot will progress straight on to the top 16. Based on the ranking of the respective powers in the previous tournament, the participant with the higher ranking will have the privilege to choose the content of the duel. Of course, his opponent will have the right to object to the chosen dueling format as well, but the right to object will be limited to once per duel. After that right has been used once, he would have no choice but to accept the next proposed dueling format. This was similar to the rules employed in previous rules, so there was no need to elaborate on it. Alright, the first round will start now. Since A1 is empty, may the 2 participants who drew A2 proceed onto the stage in the A sector. Hongshe waved his hand, and the final area of fog veiling the stage dissipated, revealing 4 stages. They were labeled A, B, C, and D respectively. 2 young men holding onto the lot which they had just picked walked toward the stage labeled A. Chapter 588, Challenging Fist Art. As they proceeded onto the stage, Hongshe urged the participants of the other 3 stages to proceed there as well. The master teachers who drew B1, C1, and D1 got into their position. Following which, they began to discuss the content of their duel. Regarding this, Hongsha wouldn't interfere at all. And soon, they finished making their choices. Of the 4 stages, 2 chose knowledge impartation, 1 chose soul depth, and the remaining 1 chose a physical duel. A competition among master teachers extended way further than mere brute strength. Their capability included their supporting occupations, soul depth, impartation of heaven's will, knowledge impartation, and many other aspects. If it was just a simple battle, there would be no need to make it so grand. As such, there were actually very few master teachers who chose physical duel as a means to determine the victor. So, this is the real master-teacher tournament, Zhong Xian remarked in awe. The previous round was just to weed out the less capable participants. What that was unfolding before him at this very instant was the true competition among master teachers, as well as the true master-teacher tournament. Gazing at the 4 stages, Zhong Xian found a familiar face. Song Chao. Even though the preliminary selection wasn't easy, he seemed to have achieved fairly decent results, thus advancing honorably to the dueling round. The person he was matched with was a disciple of a sect. While that disciple was of similar cultivation realm to Song Chao, he had fared relatively poor in the preliminary round. Knowing that it was unlikely for him to emerge triumphant in other aspects, he, making full use of the advantage derived from the rules, proposed for a straightforward fight instead. Begin. The gong signaling the start of the match sounded, and the disciple immediately dashed straight toward Song Chao. Trading blows, a huge wind gushed into their surroundings. Possessing similar cultivation realms, both of them stood their ground and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Even though the stage wasn't too big, there was formation around it. It was impossible for the duo to break the formation with their current cultivation realm, so they could fight as they pleased without any worries. It seems like Song Chao will be able to advance to the next round. After looking at the duel for a moment, Zhong Xian soon deduced that it was likely for Song Chao to triumph over this opponent. While the duo was nearly equally matched, Song Chao's movements were much more flexible and careful, biding his time for an ideal opportunity to strike. As long as his opponent showed the slightest opening out of anxiety, Song Chao would capitalize on the opportunity to defeat him swiftly. Knowing the likely conclusion, Zhong Xian turned his attention to one of the stages conducting the knowledge impartation duel instead. Compared to Song Chao's stage, where the competitors were driving their zhenqi to hurl fists at one another, this side seemed much more refined. 20 cultivators of differing cultivation realms were randomly picked from the square, and the competitors chose 10 of them each to form a group. After dividing the cultivators among the 2 competitors, they began to conduct their lesson via zhenqi telepathy so as to not interrupt one another. The time limit was an incense's time. Whoever's group experienced a greater degree of growth during this period of time would be deemed the winner. This kind of competition was much more refined, and it seemed to be more aligned with the disposition of a teacher. Seeing that it would take some time for the victor to be decided, Zhong Xian turned to look at the stage where the competitors were competing on soul depth. The 2 of them held onto a stone of insight each, and soon, numbers appeared on them: 14. 7 and 14. 9. Naturally, the latter was deemed as the victor. This was the simplest and most efficient dueling format. But still, soul depth was the foundation of a master teacher, and most people were unwilling to have it publicly known. As such, it was very rare for participants to choose such a dueling format. And soon, the first round was over. Just like what Zhong Xian guessed, Song Chao won. The 2 stages dueling via knowledge impartation also came to a conclusion. The one who fared the best induced a breakthrough in a cultivator among his group within the time limit and achieved victory. On the other stage, the master teacher won through a high overall evaluation score and advanced on to the next round. At the end of the first round, there were some who celebrated, and similarly, there were those who looked gloomy as well. But indifferent to the results, Hongsha announced the lots for the next round. For the second round, will the competitors who drew A3, B3, C3, and D2 proceed onto the stage? B2 and C2 were empty slots. Upon hearing that it was his turn, Zhong Xian walked toward the D stage. Zhongshe drew D2? Why am I so unlucky? Seeing Zhong Xian walk out from the crowd, a young man's face suddenly warped, and he nearly cried on the spot. He had also drawn d2, which meant that he was matched up against this god of destruction. It is indeed unfortunate that you were paired with him for the very first match. The mouth of the friend beside him also twitched. This Zhongshe had been showing outstanding results since the start of the tournament, even destroying all of the artifacts through inconceivable means. If there was a list of competitors whom one didn't want to be matched with, that fellow would surely be at the top. At the current stage, his reputation was even greater than Luo Xian's. To be matched with such a person in the first round, his luck was indeed terrible. What do I do now? Should I just forfeit? If I don't forfeit, will he destroy me too? The young man asked his friend with a tearful face. Given how that fellow tore apart everything before him, the young man was seriously frightened that he might be ripped into pieces if he were to stand against that god of destruction. It was only a tournament, he had no desire to die so tragically. Cough cough, I don't think he would go so far as to do it to a human too, consoled his friend. But I also thought the same for the celestial chess as well. The young man retorted. His friend was tongue-tied. That fellow was simply too frightening. If he had a choice, he would rather face the otherworldly demon once more than stand against that fellow. In other words, the pressure he felt from facing Zhongxian even exceeded that from the otherworldly demon. It wasn't easy for you to come to reach this stage, it would be unwise to forfeit at this point. Don't worry, even though that Zhongshe is incredible, he can't possibly be infallible. His friend patted his shoulder and said, in any case, the Myriad Kingdom Alliance fared worse than our sect in the previous tournament. As long as you propose a dueling format that benefits you, there might still be a chance of victory. Once you succeed, with this momentum, you will surely be able to strive for the top 8 at least. After a moment of contemplation, the young man nodded his head. You're right. Everyone would surely be watching his duel with Zhongxian. If he could achieve victory, not only would his confidence be inflated, he might also instill fear in the other competitors as the person who defeated the god of destruction. With this advantage over his competitors, he just might be able to get into the top 10. After all, psychological warfare was an essential aspect of a duel as well. Fine, for glory. Understanding that only with risk could one achieve something great, the young man gritted his teeth and stepped forward. While he was still frightened, as a 4-star master teacher, he was still able to get himself back into condition swiftly. Then let's quickly analyze Zhongshe's weakness then. Seeing the young man regain his fighting spirit, his friend nodded his head in commendation. In the first test, Zhongshe broke the ghost domain illusory city. This means that the mystic gate hidden Jiao contained within the artifact is ineffective toward him, hinting that he has excellent mental fortitude and eye of discernment. Finding the words rational, the young man nodded his head. The pitch-black ghost domain illusory city was filled with spirit beings, and without outstanding eyesight, it would be impossible for one to even navigate within it. Under such circumstances, it would be impossible for one to destroy it so easily even if they intended to do so. You are unlikely to defeat him in that aspect, so avoid any duels that concerns one's vision or discernment ability. The young man added, right. So that means that Flaw's identification and cultivation guidance are out of question. His friend continued his analysis. Okay. Moving on to the second test, he managed to persuade the otherworldly demon via his impartation of heaven's will. This means that his soul depth is extraordinary. Therefore, you shouldn't compete with him in soul depth or knowledge impartation. To be able to persuade an otherworldly demon to commit suicide with just mere words, this meant that the other party's soul depth and mastery of impartation of heavens will had reached an astounding level. If the young man were to compete with Zhongshe over this, it was likely that the scene with the otherworldly demon might replay. His friend summarized his analysis and gave his final evaluation. As for the third test and fourth test, even though very little can be said about those tests, it shows that he possesses outstanding wisdom and intelligence. As such, it is likely that his understanding of cultivation is superior. Thus, in conclusion, I think that you should just compete with him in a physical duel. Indeed, if I were to challenge him in a physical duel, considering that he's only at yin-yang realm pinnacle while I'm at clarifying turbidity realm intermediate stage, it shouldn't be a problem for me to triumph over here. The young man's eyes lit up upon seeing a ray of hope. Since there was no way to win via the other dueling format, that leaves him with only one option. Physical duel. Considering that his cultivation was higher than the other party, he was at an advantageous position. But he has a chance to reject the dueling format that I propose once. What if he were to do so? After celebrating for a short moment, the young man suddenly thought of a possibility and his smile collapsed. Even though the Myriad Kingdom Alliance didn't have any say in the selection of the dueling format, especially since they were in the last place the previous Master-Teacher tournament, their participants were still entitled the right to reject a proposed dueling format once. If he were to propose a physical duel and the other party disagrees to it, wouldn't he be limited to those few other dueling formats once again? His friend smiled. Are you a fool? There are many types of physical duel. You can simply propose a fist duel, and after he rejects it, you can go on and propose a sword duel. There is no way he'll be able to reject you then. Given that you're ranked first in terms of swordsmanship in our sect, there is no way that you will lose to him in a sword duel. That's right. Regaining his confidence, the young man's eyes lit up once more. Thank you for your suggestions. When I defeat him and proceed on to the top 10, I'll surely pay back this favor. Wait for the news of my victory. Saying which, he walked over to the D stage with a confident smile on his face. I am Wu Tianhao from Soaring Cloud Sect. May Zhongshe guide me well. Stepping onto the stage, the young man clasped his fist. Myriad Kingdom Alliance, Zhongshen. Zhongshen nodded in response. May I know what kind of dueling format Wu Shi has chosen? I wish to challenge you in a fist duel. Following by his friend's advice, the corners of Wu Tianhao's lips crept up. Fist duel? Zhongshen nodded his head. Sure. You don't agree to it. Fine, we'll have a. Wu Tianhao was excitedly prattling on when he suddenly came to realization and froze. Did you just agree to my proposed dueling format? I did. You proposed a fist duel, right? Let's start then. Zhongshen nodded. In truth, Zhongshen could tell what the other party was up to. It was simply too obvious. But in any case, it didn't make a difference to him at all. Wu Tianhao's body swayed weakly. Why can't you follow common sense? That's cheating, too, you know. You're supposed to reject my initial proposal so that we can conduct a sword duel. How can you agree to it so readily? I was thinking that I could defeat you with my ethereal swordsmanship, but you just had to wreck my plans. But it's fine this way as well. Even though my fist art is lacking as compared to my sword art, it isn't too weak either. At the very most, I'll just have to use my full strength from the very start. Let's see how you're going to withstand that. The other party was 2 small cultivation realms weaker than him, and further, there was a qualitative difference between yin-yang realm and clarifying turbidity realm as well. As such, Wu Tianhao didn't believe that Zhongshen could possibly win the fist duel. Since you've agreed to it, let's start then. Having made up his mind, Wu Tianhao drove his cultivation, and in an instant, the aura surrounding him surged. For an instant, an image of a majestic tiger stepping out of the woods came into the minds of the onlooker. Clenching his fists tightly, he charged forward. Chapter 589, Accidentally Used Too Much Force. What? Why did Zhongshe agree to a duel of fist art? Seeing the situation on the stage clearly, Pavilion Master Kang panicked. The main reason why he didn't think that Zhongshe would be able to win the champion spot was because he knew that such a thing would happen. In the end, the latter's cultivation was simply too weak. This weakness of his would surely be exploited by his opponents. The foundation to fighting was one's cultivation, and no matter how formidable Zhongshe's soul depth or other qualities were, it would be of minimal help to him in a straightforward duel. Indeed, he was definitely rash to have accepted the duel. Su Shi and Ling Shi remarked with an awful complexion. While the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, given its ranking in the previous tournament, didn't have any say in the dueling format, Zhongshe still had an opportunity to reject the dueling format. Even though the other party proposed a physical duel, he could have rejected it. On the other hand, Zhao Feiwu had already seen through the ploy of the master teachers and smiled bitterly in response. Actually, it doesn't make a difference at all. Frowning, the group turned around to look at Zhao Feiwu. As long as it wasn't a physical duel, given Zhongshe's astounding talents in all other aspects, there was no way he would lose. So why wouldn't it make a difference? Knowing that the greatest weakness of Zhongshe is his cultivation realm, how could the other party possibly give up on such an ideal opportunity? If Zhongshe had rejected the duel of fist art, there's a high chance that the other party would have proposed a duel of spear, a duel of saber, or something along those lines. He might be able to avoid it once, but he wouldn't be able to do it the second time, Zhao Feiwu said. Even though she had never been to a master-teacher tournament before, she had read many books on it, and she had a good grasp on its rules. The faces of Su Shi, Pavilion Master Kang, and the others froze. They had overlooked this due to their anxiety. Besides, as honorable master teachers, they didn't expect Zhongshe's opponent to actually exploit the loopholes in the rules in such a manner. Upon realizing this fact from Zhao Feiwu's words, their faces immediately puffed crimson in rage. Despicable. Ling Shi bellowed, how can they be so despicable? But they are still playing within the rules. In the end, this is still a tournament after all. It is natural that they would use whatever means they could to achieve victory. Pavilion Master Kang shook his head. We can only hope for a miracle to happen now. Miracle? How can a miracle happen so easily? Putting aside how Zhongshe has barely reached Yin-Yang Realm Pinnacle and it is unlikely that he has fully reinforced his cultivation yet, just the fact that there is a huge gap of 2 small cultivation realms between them already makes it nigh impossible for him to achieve victory. Su Shi shook his head. There was a huge difference even in every small cultivation realm of the transcendent mortal realm, not to mention a full cultivation realm. A Yin-Yang Pinnacle cultivator only possesses 800,000 ding of strength, whereas a clarifying turbidity realm intermediate stage expert harnesses an immense might of 1,200,000 ding. That was a difference of 400,000 ding. This was a gap that mere luck couldn't hope to cover. Indeed, the gap between the two of them is simply too great. I don't think it is possible for Zhongshe to reverse the situation as well. Pavilion Master Kang shook his head in dismay as the thought of Zhongshe falling in defeat dominated his mind. However, in the next instant, his body suddenly stiffened, and his eyes slowly widened in shock. What's wrong? Su Shi was baffled by Pavilion Master Kang's sudden reaction. Look at the stage, said Pavilion Master Kang hurriedly. At the stage? Su Shi quickly raised his gaze, only to see Zhongxian standing alone on the D stage. His opponent, Wu Tianhao, was nowhere to be seen. Where is the opponent he is fighting against? Su Shi asked bewilderedly. How in the world did that fellow disappear in the blink of an eye? One must know that leaving the stage after the start of the duel meant instant disqualification. With trembling lips, Pavilion Master Kang pointed in the sky and said, "He's flying up there." Flying? Guangdong. Su Shi and the others nearly fell to the ground. Flying? Are you saying that that fellow is a saint? The group traced Pavilion Master Kang's finger and looked up, and in an instant, a bizarre expression appeared on their faces. There was indeed a black human silhouette soaring freely in the sky. At this point, he was already around 100 meters above ground level, but his ascension didn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. If that fellow in the sky was planning an attack, there was no reason for him to soar so high up. On top of that, he was shrieking non-stop as though he had seen a ghost. Furthermore, he was ascending backward instead of forward, as though a ball which was sent flying with a kick. What's going on? Su Shi could no longer hold back his intrigue any longer. Zhongshe lightly pushed him up, and he just suddenly started flying. Pavilion Master Kang's lips were twitching uncontrollably. Even though he had seen it happen personally, he still found it hard to believe his eyes. That clarifying turbidity realm intermediate stage cultivator had driven his cultivation to its maximum capacity and shot a punch straight at Zhongshe. The might of the fist art was so great that even an expert of Pavilion Master Kang's caliber would have to go on the defensive. But Zhongshe didn't even attempt to avoid the punch at all. Instead, He faced it with a casual rising trajectory palm strike, and in the next moment, that fellow was already soaring into the sky. Lightly pushed him up. Su Shu, Ling Shu, Jin Songhai, and the others stared at one another in confusion. They felt as though they were listening to a foreign language, and in an instant, they were all left dumbfounded. Transcendent mortal 4-dan intermediate stage, that was roughly their cultivation realm as well. Furthermore, the other party was a master teacher like them, meaning his eye of discernment and capability wouldn't pale in comparison to them at all. And yet, with a light push from Zhongshe, he was actually sent flying. Why did it sound as though it had come out from a fantasy novel? No matter how they tried to process this information, it simply sounded too ridiculous to them. They weren't the only ones who were left dumbstruck. At this very instant, the entire square was completely silent. In truth, everyone also felt angered by Wu Tianhao's shameless action of proposing a duel of fist art, but upon seeing this sight, their eyeballs nearly popped out. What just happened? They had considered the possibility of Zhongshe achieving a victory, but that should have been a difficult one after trading innumerable blows. Yet, to send Wu Tianhao flying with a light push, as though he was simply throwing a pebble, could this all be a dream? When did a clarifying turbidity realm expert become such a pushover? No, it's because of Zhongshe's formidable eye of discernment. He used Wu Shi's strength against him to send him flying. That's right. He saw through the other party's technique in an instant and used the momentum of the other party's movements against him to send him flying. This technique is the ideal example of curbing force with skill, but everything happened in an instant. How did he manage to react so quickly? Soon, there were quite a few people who managed to put the pieces together, but this did little to alleviate their shock. Everything was over in a flash, but there were a fair number of 4-star master teachers present in the square, and every single one of them possessed outstanding eye of discernment. Wu Tianhao had put all of his strength into that single fist, but, as the saying goes, the branch that does not bend is the first to break. While thoughtless flexibility can land one in a disadvantageous position, a lack of flexibility can leave one vulnerable. Zhongshe had seen through the flaws of his battle technique instantaneously and exploited them. Thus, even before his fist could even connect, he was already sent flying. And so the sight of the flying man occurred. Seeing this sight, the eyelids of Wu Tianhao's friend twitched violently, and he nearly spewed blood. If only he'd known that this fellow was so formidable, he would have never proposed a physical duel. Even if Wu Tianhao wasn't injured by that palm strike, judging from how high he was flying, even if he wasn't crushed into minced meat, he would surely be crippled. Could it be that he was the legendary pig-like teammate? Just as he was filled with self-reproach, Wu Tianhao finally came to the peak of his ascension, and began falling instead. He fell headfirst into the roof of the Alliance head residence, and amidst a cloak of dust and screams of agony reminiscent of butchered pigs, he disappeared from view. Junior Tianhao. Leaping in fright, Wu Shi's friend hurriedly dashed toward the direction where Wu Shi disappeared. But before he could get far, a voice tinged with embarrassment was suddenly heard from the D stage. Pardon me. I accidentally used too much force. Pu. Accidentally used too much force. Hearing those words, everyone nearly collapsed to the ground. You are the weaker one here, the one with the lower cultivation realm. You knocked a person with higher cultivation realm flying, and you still said that you accidentally used too much force. The more Wu Shi's friend thought about it, the more frenzied he felt. It was as if that fellow wasn't content with just smashing through every single test in the preliminary selection. At the start of the dueling round, he even had to knock a cultivator 2 small cultivation realms higher than him up into the air. What kind of monster was this fellow? Where did the fairness in the world go to? While he was feeling so stifled that he could go insane, Zhongxian was plagued with frustration as well. That fellow simply charged straight at him with all of his might as soon as the duel began. If it was anyone else, they might have really been forced into a disadvantageous position instantly. But in truth, that attack posed no threat to him at all. With a might of 1 million ding from his Zhenqi cultivation and 1,600,000 ding from his soul cultivation, he was able to harness an immense might of 2,600,000 ding in total. This was on par with a consonant spirit realm intermediate stage expert, It would be a miracle if that fellow could withstand it. But at the same time, he knew that if he were to send the other party flying in a frontal confrontation, it might incur some doubts. As such, he chose to utilize the Eye of Insight to search for an opening in the other party's technique so as to throw him off the stage. However, he still underestimated that fellow's strength. On top of that, he hadn't had many opportunities to test out his strength ever since the advancement in his cultivation, and thus, he didn't have a clear grasp of his strength yet. As such, he accidentally put in a little more force. Falling from such a high altitude, even if the other party was a clarifying turbidity realm intermediate stage cultivator, he would still suffer grievous wounds. While it was unlikely that he would die from this ordeal, he would probably be bound to his bed for the next 2 months. Honestly speaking, Zhongxian really didn't do it intentionally. His face-off with Clone, which ended in a tragic defeat for him, had given him a skewed impression of transcendent mortal Fordan experts. How could he have known that that fellow would actually fly so far? Forget it. Hongsha, does this count as my victory? Since what was done, there was no use being conflicted over it. Thus, Zhongxian turned his attention to Hongsha and asked, "Why yes, you've won." Hongsha's lips twitched. It seemed the other party's destructive capability didn't differentiate between artifacts and humans. He wasn't the only one harboring such thoughts. The eyebrows of the other participating master teachers on the stage were also twitching uncontrollably. By no means should we ever fight with this fellow. You're right, but if we don't challenge him to a physical duel, what else can we challenge him in? I've no idea as well. But in any case, a physical duel is out of question. Otherwise, who knows what kind of tragic fate could befall us. While everyone was astounded by Zhongshi's amazing feats in the preliminary selection, they didn't think that he was much of a threat. After all, the other party was a mere yin-yang realm pinnacle cultivator. As long as they unleashed their full strength, defeating him shouldn't be a problem at all. But reality couldn't be any further than that. Wu Tianhao was a clear example. Just thinking about Wu Tianhao's plight was already sufficient to send shivers down their spines. Since Zhongxian finished his duel early, he turned his attention to the other stages. In this round, his pair was the only one who resorted to a physical duel. The other pairs chose to battle it out through other means. In fact, there was even a pair who chose the unconventional discourse duel. On top of a deep understanding toward cultivation, master teachers must also possess broad knowledge. The format of discourse duel is similar to pill discourse. Both parties would pose questions to one another, and the side that failed to answer correctly first would be deemed the loser. To ensure greater equity, the duel consisted of a total of 3 rounds, and the side that won 2 rounds was the overall winner. In the discourse duel, the other master teacher from Fleeting Cloud sect achieved victory. After realizing that there were actually minimal differences among the different dueling formats, Zhongxian quickly lost his interest. Sometime later, Hongsha's voice sounded. "All right, since we've decided on the top 16, we'll take an hour of rest before proceeding on to the next round to determine the top 8. The results of the top 16 are out." Just as Zhongxian was curious to see who was in the top 16, he suddenly noticed Ruo Huangongzi walking over with a worried expression. Chapter 590, Zhao Feiwu's Analysis. Zhongshe. Walking up to Zhongxian, Ruo Huangongzi hesitated for a moment, gritted his teeth, and said, "I have something to request of you." "Feel free to speak," Zhongxian replied with a smile. While he did have some misunderstandings with this proud genius of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, they had resolved most of their grudges back in the Glacier Plain Court. Furthermore, as fellow participants representing Myriad Kingdom Alliance, if he could be of help, he wouldn't reject it. "Initially, I don't bear much hope in reaching the top 10. However, now that I'm already in the top 16, if I don't at least give it a try, I will regret it for life." Ruo Huangongzi's face reddened. Having picked A1, he was able to advance to the next round unconditionally. Humans are born with desire. If he had been defeated in the previous round, he wouldn't have been so conflicted. Now that he was already in the top 16, a victory away from getting into the top 10, he couldn't help but harbor some hope. But the one I'm fighting against in the next match is Qin Lei of White Alio's sect. With a distressed expression, Ruo Huan Gongzi uttered gloomily, I don't have the confidence to defeat him. Zhong Xian turned to look at Ruo Huan Gongzi and asked, Qin Lei? The person who is ranked third on the list. He had seen this name on the list that Pavilion Master Kang gave him previously. Qin Lei was a genius of White Alio's sect. As a 4-star pinnacle master teacher and a transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle expert, he was only below fleeting cloud sects Luo Xian and the frigid gale sects Liao Wuji on the list, and he was a popular contender for the champion spot as well. Yes. Ruo Huan Gongzi nodded his head. If that's the case, it would indeed be difficult for you to defeat him. Zhong Xian frowned. While Ruo Huan Gongzi improved immensely in the past 2 months, reaching transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle as well, it would still be difficult for him to compete against disciples of huge sects like his current opponent. After all, there was a huge gap in the resources they were entitled to over many years, and 2 months of last-minute training was far from sufficient to cover the gap. Thus, I wish to seek Zhongshi's guidance. Regardless of whether I'm able to defeat him or not, you'll have my gratitude. Ruo Huan Gongzi quickly said. Zhongshi had truly fared impressively in this tournament. Even the most popular contenders such as Luo Xian and Liao Wuji found themselves being outshone. If there was someone who could bring him the closest to success, it wasn't his teacher Pavilion Master Kang but the young man standing before him at this instant. I can offer you pointers, just that. At this point, Zhong Xian shook his head before continuing. Given that we don't even know the content of the duel, how can I offer you any effective pointers? There were many different dueling formats to the Master-Teacher tournament, and given that the Myriad Kingdom Alliance was ranked in the last place in the previous tournament, Ruo Huan Gongzi didn't have the right to choose. Under such circumstances, he could only go along with the proposed dueling format from the other party, so how could Zhong Xian offer any effective guidance? After all, the bare minimum to preparing a winning hand was to know what cards the other party had up his sleeves. Otherwise, even if a 6-star or 7-star master teacher were to be present here, he would surely be completely helpless in the face of this situation. Even if Zhong Xian wished to be of help, there was nothing he could do. Ruo Huan Gongzi hesitated for a moment before saying, in the previous round, the person he faced was Wu Qing from True Breath sect. The both of them were nearly equals, so he proposed knowledge impartation and won through it. Against me. I think there's a good chance he might choose a physical duel so as to be spared the effort. Wu Qing was also another master teacher whose name was listed in the top 10 of the list, but due to his bad luck, he met with Qin Lei in the very first round and ended up being eliminated. As the both of them were nearly equally matched, Qin Lei proposed knowledge impartation. But against Ruo Huan Gongzi, it was unlikely that Qin Lei would go through that much trouble. The chances were that he would outright propose a physical duel. Even though the both of them were transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle, the other party had more years of experience behind him. Not to mention, the resources that White Alio's sect provided the other party was far greater than Ruo Huan Gongzi's. Thus, it was likely for Ruo Huan Gongzi to be the weaker one in all aspects, be it battle technique or power control. As such, his guess was actually rather logical. There was indeed a high possibility that the other party would propose a physical duel against him. This. Zhong Xian scratched his head. If it was really a physical duel, then things could be solved easily. It was a walk in the park for him to raise the other party's fighting prowess up a notch within the next hour. However, what if it wasn't a physical duel? Wouldn't all preparation be done in vain? Just as Zhong Xian was just about to say something, Pavilion Master Kang called over to them. Zhongshu, Ruo Huan, have some food first. Turning around, they realized that most of the master teachers had already departed from the stage to rest their wearied bodies and regain their energy. Let's head down first. There was no use discussing this matter when nothing was confirmed at all. Thus, the duo walked down the stage. The Alliance head residents had prepared quite a luxurious spread. There was even spirit beast meat, an extremely effective nourishment in recovering one's expended junqi. Upon seeing the feast, Zhong Xian felt his stomach grumble. What were you two talking about? Zhao Feiwu asked the duo with a light smile. Oh, Ruo Huangongzi is facing Qin Lei from the White Alios sect in the next match, and he hopes that I can offer him some pointer for it. However, we don't know what dueling format the other party is likely to choose, Zhong Xian replied as he filled his mouth with the delicacies before him. What kind of dueling format? Zhao Feiwu cupped her chin, and after a moment of contemplation, she replied, I think that it is likely to be comprehension of cultivation. Comprehension of cultivation? Zhong Xian, Ruo Huangongzi, and the others in the surroundings turned to look at her. In truth, most of them had agreed with Ruo Huangongzi's view that the other party would choose physical duel. As such, they were intrigued to see that someone had a different viewpoint from theirs. Comprehension of cultivation? But that is a very troublesome duel to hold, and the evaluation is extremely tricky as well. Very few people would choose that kind of dueling format, Susha replied. There were many ways a comprehension of cultivation duel could be held, such as interpreting a battle technique, interpreting a cultivation technique, and so on. But regardless of which one it was extremely time-consuming and effort-consuming. More importantly, there were many differing viewpoints regarding the topic, and they could all be correct at the same time. In other words, as long as one's interpretation wasn't too off the mark, it would be hard to decide on a winner. On top of that, as 4-star pinnacle master teachers, it was impossible for their understanding of cultivation to be too far off the mark. As such, there were very few who would opt for such a troublesome dueling format. Tell us more about it. But still, while the princess before him was lacking in cultivation, Zhong Xian knew that she was an avid reader, and she had shown that she was particularly astute in guessing the thoughts of others on multiple occasions as well. The basis behind my deduction is simple. It depends on what he hopes to achieve in this tournament. Zhao Feiwu chuckled mysteriously. What he hopes to achieve? Ruo Huangongzi was taken aback. Wouldn't it be winning the champion seat? The greatest glory one could derive from the master-teacher tournament would be to win the champion seat. As one of the most popular contenders for the position, it would be natural for Qin Lei to be eyeing that seat. You're right, but what do you know is his greatest obstruction to his goal at the moment? Zhao Feiwu's eyes narrowed into crescents as she turned her beautiful face toward the young man before her. You mean Zhongshe? There was no one present in this square who would offer a different answer than that at this point. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to use the word rampage to summarize Zhong Xian's performance in the preliminary selection. And after the first dueling round, there was no one else who thought that they could exploit his low cultivation. With this, he had become the strongest contender for the champion seat, standing above even Luo Xian. Thus, the greatest obstruction Qin Lei would face in becoming the champion was indubitably him. Indeed. Since his goal is Zhongshe, naturally, he doesn't view you as a threat. Thus, in the first place, he has never really thought of you as an equal before. Zhao Feiwu said. Ruo Huangongzi's face reddened. Even though those words were indeed hurtful, he knew that it was true. Given the disparity between both of their capabilities, the other party indeed had nothing to fear of him. However, given that you came from the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, and his goal is to defeat Zhongshe, there is a good chance he will use Zhongshe's greatest strength to defeat you so as to taunt him. Zhao Feiwu continued. My greatest strength. Zhong Xian was taken aback by those words. UN. Even though you have shown outstanding aptitude in multiple aspects such as your temperament and wisdom, without a doubt, your greatest strength is your intelligence and impartation of heaven's will. That's right. Pavilion Master Kang nodded his head. Zhongshe had performed impressively throughout the tournament, but these two factors were what that left the deepest mark on the onlookers. Using impartation of heaven's will to persuade an otherworldly demon to kill himself, defeating the puppet of the celestial chest with a single move. On the other hand, destroying the ghost domain illusory city didn't really reflect much about Zhongshe's capability, especially given that the other participants hadn't had the chance to undergo it themselves, whereas memorizing 20,000 books was due to his strong background. These two feats paled in comparison to the former two. Impartation of heaven's will is highly tied to one's soul depth, so even if he thought that he could defeat you in that aspect, it would unlikely to be spectacular. But intelligence is different. A master teacher's intelligence is usually reflected through the depth of his understanding of cultivation, and if he could perform outstandingly in that aspect, he might be able to steal the spotlight from Zhongshe. This is a good opportunity for him, so I believe that there's a good chance that he will grasp it. Zhao Feiwu chuckled as she revealed her analysis. Rather, I think that a physical duel would be one of the less likely options for him. After all, it is unseemly for a refined master teacher to be engaged in physical brawls. It wouldn't reflect well on him even if he were to win. You're right. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. Zhao Feiwu seemed to have grasped the other party's thoughts accurately, and her words seemed to fit perfectly as though a jigsaw puzzle. Your analysis is right, but how would a duel involving comprehension of cultivation be carried out? After all, we can't possibly find a manual on the spot and decipher it. Ruo Huan Gongzi asked in bafflement. The most direct way to determine whose comprehension of cultivation is deeper would be for the duo to decipher the same book, but which book would they choose? After all, wouldn't the result be biased no matter which book is chosen? There are other ways to measure one's comprehension of cultivation. If I recall correctly, there's a dueling format known as flaw identification, right? Zhao Feiwu replied with a smile. Flaw identification? You mean, the dueling format where both sides each execute a battle technique, and the respective opponents point out the flaws in the executed technique, and whoever manages to point out more flaws is the winner? Ruo Huan Gongzi was stunned. But that requires one to have an exceptional eye of discernment and profound comprehension of cultivation. Usually, only higher-rank master teachers would do it for lower-rank master teachers. For him to point out my flaws. He didn't finish his words, but what he wanted to express couldn't be any clearer. They were both 4-star pinnacle master teacher. For the other party to actually boast of correcting Ruo Huan Gongzi's mistake, wasn't he being a little too arrogant? Indeed. Don't worry, since this Qin Lei wishes to win the spotlight and outshine Zhongshe, there is a very good chance he will choose this dueling format. Zhao Feiwu smiled. Since the other party was aiming for the champion seat, he had to shatter the heavy pressure Zhong Xian was exerting on him first. And for this, Ruo Huan Gongzi, who was a fellow representative of Myriad Kingdom Alliance, served as the perfect stepping stone. Only by using the most arrogant way to step down on Ruo Huan Gongzi would his own strength be emphasized. Only through this way could he finally get on equal footing with Zhongshe. Ruo Huan Gongzi had a bitter look on his face. What was this? He thought that he would at least be respected as a fellow competitor in the master-teacher tournament given the massive rise in his cultivation, but in the end, the other party only regarded as a mere stepping stone. The heck, I'll screw him over. The more he thought about it, the angrier he felt. Gritting his teeth, Ruo Huan Gongzi turned to Zhong Xian and asked, if this is the dueling format, does Zhongshe have any ideas as to how I can achieve victory? To actually challenge a master teacher of equivalent rank to a match of flaw identification, the other party was indeed hubristic. But while Ruo Huan Gongzi hated to admit it, he had no confidence to face the other party in such a match-off. Thus, he entrusted his hopes to the young man before him who had created miracles time and time again. Ideas? Zhong Xian frowned. After a moment of thought, his eyes lit up, and a peculiar smile appeared on his face. I do have an idea, but it won't be easy to carry out. Oh! As long as I can defeat it, I'd do anything no matter how difficult it is. Hearing that the other party had an idea in mind, Ruo Huan Gongzi's eyes lit up. He quickly stood up and bowed sincerely. Zhongshe, I humbly seek your guidance. All right then. Zhong Xian casually picked up the bowl of meat soup which he was half done with and passed it over. Take this and pour it over your opponent. Ah! Pour it over Qin Shi? Ruo Huan Gongzi's eyes widened in shock. Chapter 591. A Supernatural Occurrence. I asked you to teach me how to defeat Qin Lei in the duel. Why are you telling me to pour meat soup over him instead? Big brother, I'm a master teacher, not a thug, to conduct such shameless actions. Besides, if I were to do that, I would only enrage the other party. What use would it be to the duel? Ruo Huan Gongzi thought that Zhong Xian would at least offer a decent solution given his astounding means, but never in his dreams did he expect the other party to be so unreliable. If he were to really do so, his reputation would immediately plummet to rock bottom. He wasn't the only one feeling lightheaded. Pavilion Master Kang and the others also widened their eyes in shock. Pouring soup over the other party? What kind of move is that? Perplexed, they instinctively turned their eyes over to Zhao Feiwu, in hopes for an explanation. Given how the latter was able to analyze Qin Lei's thoughts logically a moment ago, she might be able to do the same this time round too. But with a single glance, they staggered. Zhao Feiwu's eyes were so widened in shock that they could simply snap out of their sockets any time now. She was as dumbfounded by Zhongshi's words as they were. While her cultivation was lacking, she possessed incredible wisdom that allowed her to make sense out of most situations. But what in the world does this pour it over your opponent mean? This. The gap in logic was simply too huge for me to follow. The dueling format is likely to be flaw identification, and Ruo Huan Gongzi hopes to win the match. And so, you instructed the latter to pour meat soup over his opponent. Something just doesn't sound right here. How the heck am I supposed to analyze such a ridiculous situation? You aren't willing? Then I can't help you either. Zhong Xian shook his head in disappointment. He had already offered a solution. If the other party was unwilling to carry it out, there was nothing he could do. While White Alio's sect leader Bai Kaiji had once laid his hands on Zheng Yang and the others, he had already been punished on the spot, and Zhong Xian didn't think there was any need to implicate the juniors in this matter. The reason why he was helping Ruo Huan Gongzi was solely out of their relationship. If the other party wasn't willing to reciprocate, he didn't wish to push his ground either. Ruo Huan Gongzi knew that the only hope he had at victory at this point was to follow Zhongshi's instructions. Clenching his fists, he asked, "If I do as you said, can Zhongsha really guarantee my victory?" "Guarantee? No one can guarantee anything. If you believe in me, do as I say. Otherwise, we can just drop the matter." Zhong Xian continued eating. If Zhao Feiwu's analysis turned out to be accurate, and the other party really intended to slap his face, then he was confident that his plan would bring Ruo Huan Gongzi to victory. Otherwise it would prove to be futile. Ruo Huan Gongzi fell into contemplation, but it didn't take too long for him to make up his mind. Gritting his teeth, he declared, "All right, I'll go." The top 10 would get a chance to study at Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. If he could grasp this opportunity, he would surely achieve incredible accomplishments in the future. If he let it slip through his fingers, becoming a 5-star master teacher could possibly remain an obstacle that he would never overcome in his lifetime. Weighing that against Qin Lei, his wrath did seem insignificant in comparison. The world is like a race to get to the top of a pyramid. The further you advance, the more competition you will face. If Ruo Huan Gongzi didn't make a move, the other party would simply take him as a stepping stone. Fairness doesn't exist in this world. If one were to keep thinking of the welfare of others, one could never hope to climb to the top. Cough cough. Ruo Huan, you should reconsider this. Hearing that his student was really going to pour meat soup over Qin Lei, Pavilion Master Kang's eyebrows twitched. "I fear that if you were to do that, Qinsha would beat you to death and our relationship with White Alio's sect would be a goner." Ruo Huan Gongzi's lips twitched. Indeed. If he were to do so, the other party might just smash him into a lump of meat paste. Would you simply remain still as he tries to beat you? You have legs, run. Besides, there are so many master teachers watching, he won't dare do anything overboard. Besides, you should have confidence in your physical resilience, you won't die that easily. Zhong Xian waved his hands. "In any case, I'm here so you don't have anything to worry about. I can guarantee you that as long as you run away after that, he'll allow you to leave without beating you up." Ruo Huan Gongzi. "Without beating me up? Ha ha ha. All right then." Knowing that he had no other choice but to listen to Zhongsha to win, Ruo Huan Gongzi tossed aside his hesitation. Gritting his teeth, he took the bowl of meat soup and walked over to Qin Lei. Somehow, it seemed to reflect the desolate sight of a soldier marching to his own doom. Seeing him walk toward Qin Lei, the lips of Pavilion Master Kang and the others couldn't help but twitch. While they had faith in Zhongsha, this was a little too much. "Zhongsha, will he really be fine?" Zhao Feiwu couldn't help but ask. "How can he be fine? Grabbing a piece of meat and stuffing it into his mouth, Zhongxian replied with a slightly muffled voice. How can he be fine? The crowd's eyelids twitched violently. If it wasn't fine, why did you instruct Ruo Huangongzi over? Are you that intent on seeing his sorry plight? The expression on everyone's faces clearly said that they would never let him go if he didn't explain this matter clearly to them. Thus, Zhongxian began speaking. Your analysis is logical. There's an 80% chance that Qin Shi will choose floor identification as the dueling format. However, there's still a 20% room of error. UN. Zhao Feiwu nodded in agreement. No matter how logical her deduction was, she wasn't Qin Lei and she couldn't read his thoughts precisely. It was possible for the other party to have other thoughts in mind regarding this matter. If I were to pour a bowl of meat soup on you to provoke you, what would you do? Zhongxian asked. I would beat you up. Zhao Feiwu replied. Indeed, that is likely to be Qin Lei's reaction too. However, looking at it from another perspective, such an action could be considered as a direct signal from Ruo Huangongzi that he wants a physical duel. As a 4-star master teacher, Qin Lei will surely deduce this much. Under such circumstances, how do you think he'll react? This. Everyone was stunned. Pouring a bowl of meat soup on someone, that is a clear act of provocation. To be provoked before the duel, it was clear that his opponent wanted him to propose a physical duel. It would be hard to believe that Ruo Huangongzi didn't have anything up his sleeves given such circumstances. While Qin Lei might be confident in his fighting prowess as well, Ruo Huangongzi's actions would surely sprout a seed of doubt in his mind. Given how much he wanted the champion's seat, he would surely choose to opt for another dueling format so as to avoid any possible mishaps. At the same time, this would also reflect his magnanimity and create a positive impression of himself. At the same time, if Qin Shi were to attempt to hit Ruo Huangongzi after being poured with meat soup, we'll be able to analyze his movements. If so, we can make some preparations for the duel later on, Zhongxian said. If the other party didn't execute a battle technique, he would be unable to peer into the other party's flaws. And in a normal and fair duel, it was nigh impossible for Ruo Huangongzi to win Qin Lei. On the other hand, if Qin Lei were to execute his battle technique out of rage, a book on him would be formed in the Library of Heaven's Path, and Zhongxian would be able to exploit his flaws. As for whether Ruo Huangongzi would be beaten up or not, that wouldn't be any of his business. Ruo Huangongzi would just have to treat it as the price of victory. I see. Hearing the explanation, everyone came to a realization, and they widened their eyes in admiration. They thought that Zhao Feiwu's analysis was already impressive, but Zhongshi's thoughts were clearly deeper and more thorough. Within a short period of time, not only did he realize the possible errors in Zhao Feiwu's analysis, he even found a way to cover it up while executing his plan. Incredible. It was fortunate that he was on the same line as the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. The group shuddered at the thought of facing an opponent like that. Look, it's starting. At that moment, Su Shi suddenly pointed forward. Everyone turned their gazes over, and at this moment, Ruo Huangongzi was already standing before Qin Lei. At this moment, Qin Lei was also in the midst of his meal. Perplexed to see his opponent carrying a bowl toward him, he was a little stunned. Qin Shi, nice to meet you. Ruo Huangongzi nodded. Why you too? Qin Lei frowned. Before we start on our duel, I'd like to discuss something with you. Ruo Huangongzi said politely. Discuss something with me? What is it? If you wish to admit defeat now, there's no need for it. Qin Lei harumphed coldly. But before he could finish speaking, a steaming hot liquid came flying toward him, drenching his robe. The heck? In that instant, it was as if something within Qin Lei had snapped, and frenzy overtook his rationality. He thought that that fellow was here to admit defeat in hopes that his pride could be spared on the stage later on. Never in his dreams did he expect a bowl of steaming meat soup to come flying toward him instead. I'll kill you. Roaring furiously, he immediately drove his zhenqi and a powerful aura came gushing out. He raised his palm and directed it toward Ruo Huangongzi forcefully. Who? But Ruo Huangongzi was already prepared for this. He immediately leaped to the side and ran away. Pardon me, Qin Shi. I didn't do it on purpose, I simply lost my grip on the bowl. Black lines streaked across everyone's face. To carry a bowl of meat soup over for no reason, and you say it wasn't intentional? Not to mention, you were around 2 to 3 meters away from the other party. For the meat soup to travel that distance despite it being a slip of your hands, you're incredible. Touch your conscience and ask yourself if you can believe that excuse. Damn it. After hearing those words, Qin Lei's rage flurried. Just as he was about to rush over to kill that fellow, an elder suddenly stopped him. Elder Ju. Seeing that the one stopping him was an elder of his sect, Qin Lei hurriedly stopped. Don't fall for the other party's ploy. Elder Ju spoke to him through Zhenqi telepathy. Fall for the other party's ploy? Qin Lei was taken aback. Indeed. The other party is clearly coming over intentionally to provoke you. If you were to strike him now, there is a good chance that you might be stripped of your qualification as a participant in the tournament. Elder Ju said. As a prestigious event held every decade, the Master Teacher Tournament had strict rules. If participants were to fight out of their match, there was a chance that they might be stripped of their qualification. But Qin Lei's body froze. He understood the logic behind it, but he still found it hard to suppress his anger. As a proud 4-star pinnacle master teacher to be splattered with meat soup, it would be a wonder if he wasn't angry. With the death of our sect leader, our White Alios sect is currently facing its greatest crisis. You must get into the top 10 in this tournament, or else, it'll only be a matter of time before our sect is annexed by the other powers. Elder Ju spoke gravely. He was present in the confrontation against Zhongshe that day, and the sight of Yangshe killing their sect leader was still fresh in his mind. Having offended a plausible 8-star master teacher, their White Alios sect was facing the greatest calamity in its existence. Their only hope at this point was for Qin Lei to successfully get into the top 10. Once he got into Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, the other powers would have to reconsider their options before laying their hands on them. Since that fellow is here to provoke you, he must have some kind of ace up his sleeves. Or else, he might have already given up on the tournament and he wishes to pull you down with him. Elder Ju continued. You mustn't fall for his ploy. Then what should I do? Qin Lei's heart jolted, and he immediately forced himself to calm down. There's no need to get even with him immediately. We should first continue on with the idea we decided upon and confirm the spot in the top 10. After the tournament, you can always challenge him to a master-teacher confrontation, or even a life and death battle. Elder Ju harumphed. By then, he will be in your palms, and you will be able to do whatever you want with him. Even if you were to tear him into pieces, there would be no one to stop you. This. Qin Lei hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth in savagery. All right, I'll challenge him to a life-and-death duel after the tournament. If I don't kill him, I won't be called Qin Lei. He actually didn't chase me. After a moment, Ruo Huan Gongzi turned around and saw that no one was behind him. At this moment, he suddenly recalled what Zhongshe said. Is this a supernatural occurrence? You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.